The Brothers Karamazov. Novel by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Book 3. The Sensualists. Chapter 1. In the servants' quarters. The Karamazovs' house was far from being in the center of the town. But it was not quite outside it. It was a pleasant-looking old house of 2 stories, painted gray, with a red iron roof. It was roomy and snug, and might still last many years. There were all sorts of unexpected little cupboards and closets and staircases. There were rats in it, but Fyodor Pavlovich did not altogether dislike them. One doesn't feel so solitary when one's left alone in the evening, he used to say. It was his habit to send the servants away to the lodge for the night and to lock himself up alone. The lodge was a roomy and solid building in the yard. Fyodor Pavlovich used to have the cooking done there, although there was a kitchen in the house. He did not like the smell of cooking, and, winter and summer alike. The dishes were carried in across the courtyard. The house was built for a large family, there was room for 5 times as many, with their servants. But at the time of our story there was no one living in the house but Fyodor Pavlovich and his son Ivan. And in the lodge there were only 3 servants, old Grigory, and his old wife Marfa, and a young man called Smerdakov. Of these 3 we must say a few words. Of old Grigory we have said something already. He was firm and determined and went blindly and obstinately for his object, if once he had been brought by any reasons, and they were often very illogical ones, to believe that it was immutably right. He was honest and incorruptible. His wife, Marfa Ignatyevna, had obeyed her husband's will implicitly all her life, yet she had pestered him terribly after the emancipation of the serfs. She was set on leaving Fyodor Pavlovich and opening a little shop in Moscow with their small savings. But Grigory decided then, once for all, that the woman's talking nonsense, for every woman is dishonest, and that they ought not to leave their old master, whatever he might be, for that was now their duty. "Do you understand what duty is?" he asked Marfa Ignatyevna. "I understand what duty means, Grigory Vasilyevich, but why it's our duty to stay here I never shall understand," Marfa answered firmly. "Well, don't understand then. But so it shall be. And you hold your tongue." And so it was. They did not go away, and Fyodor Pavlovich promised them a small sum for wages, and paid it regularly. Grigory knew, too, that he had an indisputable influence over his master. It was true, and he was aware of it. Fyodor Pavlovich was an obstinate and cunning buffoon, yet, though his will was strong enough in some of the affairs of life, as he expressed it, he found himself, to his surprise, extremely feeble in facing certain other emergencies. He knew his weaknesses and was afraid of them. There are positions in which one has to keep a sharp lookout. And that's not easy without a trustworthy man, and Grigory was a most trustworthy man. Many times in the course of his life Fyodor Pavlovich had only just escaped a sound thrashing through Grigory's intervention, and on each occasion the old servant gave him a good lecture. But it wasn't only thrashings that Fyodor Pavlovich was afraid of. There were graver occasions, and very subtle and complicated ones, when Fyodor Pavlovich could not have explained the extraordinary craving for someone faithful and devoted, which sometimes unaccountably came upon him all in a moment. It was almost a morbid condition. Corrupt and often cruel in his lust, like some noxious insect, Fyodor Pavlovich was sometimes, in moments of drunkenness, overcome by superstitious terror and a moral convulsion which took an almost physical form. "My soul's simply quaking in my throat at those times," he used to say. At such moments he liked to feel that there was near at hand, in the lodge if not in the room, a strong, faithful man, virtuous and unlike himself, who had seen all his debauchery and knew all his secrets, but was ready in his devotion to overlook all that, not to oppose him, above all, not to reproach him or threaten him with anything, either in this world or in the next, and, in case of need, to defend him, from whom? From somebody unknown, but terrible and dangerous. What he needed was to feel that there was another man, an old and tried friend, that he might call him in his sick moments merely to look at his face, or, perhaps, exchange some quite irrelevant words with him. And if the old servant were not angry, he felt comforted. And if he were angry, he was more dejected. It happened even, very rarely however, that Fyodor Pavlovitch went at night to the lodge to wake Grigory and fetch him for a moment. When the old man came, Fyodor Pavlovitch would begin talking about the most trivial matters, and would soon let him go again. Sometimes even with a jest. And after he had gone, Fyodor Pavlovitch would get into bed with a curse and sleep the sleep of the just. Something of the same sort had happened to Fyodor Pavlovitch on Alyosha's arrival. Alyosha pierced his heart by living with him, seeing everything and blaming nothing. Moreover, Alyosha brought with him something his father had never known before, a complete absence of contempt for him and an invariable kindness, a perfectly natural unaffected devotion to the old man who deserved it so little. All this was a complete surprise to the old profligate, who had dropped all family ties. It was a new and surprising experience for him, who had till then loved nothing but evil. When Alyosha had left him, he confessed to himself that he had learnt something he had not till then been willing to learn. I have mentioned already that Grigory had detested Adelaida Ivanovna, the first wife of Fyodor Pavlovitch and the mother of Dmitri, and that he had, on the contrary, protected Sophia Ivanovna, the poor crazy woman, against his master and anyone who chanced to speak ill or lightly of her. His sympathy for the unhappy wife had become something sacred to him, so that even now, 20 years after, he could not bear a slighting allusion to her from anyone, and would at once check the offender. Externally, Grigory was cold, dignified and taciturn, and spoke, weighing his words, without frivolity. It was impossible to tell at first sight whether he loved his meek, obedient wife, but he really did love her, and she knew it. Marfa Ignatyevna was by no means foolish, she was probably, indeed, cleverer than her husband, or, at least, more prudent than he in worldly affairs, and yet she had given in to him in everything without question or complaint ever since her marriage, and respected him for his spiritual superiority. It was remarkable how little they spoke to one another in the course of their lives, and only of the most necessary daily affairs. The grave and dignified Grigory thought over all his cares and duties alone, so that Marfa Ignatyevna had long grown used to knowing that he did not need her advice. She felt that her husband respected her silence, and took it as a sign of her good sense. He had never beaten her but once, and then only slightly. Once during the year after Fyodor Pavlovitch's marriage with Adelaida Ivanovna, the village girls and women, at that time serfs, were called together before the house to sing and dance. They were beginning in the green meadows, when Marfa, at that time a young woman, skipped forward and danced the Russian dance, not in the village fashion, but as she had danced it when she was a servant in the service of the rich Musov family, in their private theatre, where the actors were taught to dance by a dancing master from Moscow. Grigory saw how his wife danced, and, an hour later, at home in their cottage he gave her a lesson, pulling her hair a little. But there attended, the beating was never repeated, and Marfa Ignatyevna gave up dancing. God had not blessed them with children. One child was born but it died. Grigory was fond of children, and was not ashamed of showing it. When Adelaida Ivanovna had run away, Grigory took Dmitri, then a child of 3 years old, combed his hair and washed him in a tub with his own hands, and looked after him for almost a year. Afterwards he had looked after Ivan and Alyosha, for which the general's widow had rewarded him with a slap in the face, but I have already related all that. The only happiness his own child had brought him had been in the anticipation of its birth. When it was born, he was overwhelmed with grief and horror. The baby had 6 fingers. Grigory was so crushed by this, that he was not only silent till the day of the christening, but kept away in the garden. It was spring, and he spent 3 days digging the kitchen garden. The 3rd day was fixed for christening the baby. Meantime Grigory had reached a conclusion. Going into the cottage where the clergy were assembled and the visitors had arrived, including Fyodor Pavlovitch, who was to stand godfather, he suddenly announced that the baby ought not to be christened at all. He announced this quietly, briefly, forcing out his words, and gazing with dull intentness at the priest. "Why not?" asked the priest with good-humored surprise. "Because it's a dragon," muttered Grigory. "A dragon? What dragon?" Grigory did not speak for some time. "It's a confusion of nature," he muttered vaguely, but firmly, and obviously unwilling to say more. They laughed, and of course christened the poor baby. Grigory prayed earnestly at the font, but his opinion of the newborn child remained unchanged. Yet he did not interfere in any way. As long as the sickly infant lived he scarcely looked at it, tried indeed not to notice it, and for the most part kept out of the cottage. But when, at the end of a fortnight, the baby died of thrush, he himself laid the child in its little coffin, looked at it in profound grief, and when they were filling up the shallow little grave he fell on his knees and bowed down to the earth. He did not for years afterwards mention his child. Nor did Marfa speak of the baby before him, and, even if Grigory were not present, she never spoke of it above a whisper. Marfa observed that, from the day of the burial, he devoted himself to religion, and took to reading the lives of the saints, for the most part sitting alone and in silence, and always putting on his big, round, silver-rimmed spectacles. He rarely read aloud, only perhaps in Lent. He was fond of the Book of Job, and had somehow got hold of a copy of the sayings and sermons of the God-fearing Father Isaac the Syrian, which he read persistently for years together. Understanding very little of it, but perhaps prizing and loving it the more for that. Of late he had begun to listen to the doctrines of the sect of flagellants settled in the neighborhood. He was evidently shaken by them, but judged it unfitting to go over to the new faith. His habit of theological reading gave him an expression of still greater gravity. He was perhaps predisposed to mysticism. And the birth of his deformed child, and its death, had, as though by special design, been accompanied by another strange and marvelous event, which, as he said later, had left a stamp upon his soul. It happened that, on the very night after the burial of his child, Marfa was awakened by the wail of a newborn baby. She was frightened and waked her husband. He listened and said he thought it was more like someone groaning. It might be a woman. He got up and dressed. It was a rather warm night in May. As he went down the steps, he distinctly heard groans coming from the garden. But the gate from the yard into the garden was locked at night, and there was no other way of entering it, for it was enclosed all round by a strong, high fence. Going back into the house, Grigory lighted a lantern, took the garden key, and taking no notice of the hysterical fears of his wife, who was still persuaded that she heard a child crying, and that it was her own baby crying and calling for her, went into the garden in silence. There he heard at once that the groans came from the bathhouse that stood near the garden gate, and that they were the groans of a woman. Opening the door of the bathhouse, he saw a sight which petrified him. An idiot girl, who wandered about the streets and was known to the whole town by the nickname of Lizaveta Smodiaschaya, Stinking Lizaveta, had got into the bathhouse and had just given birth to a child. She lay dying with a baby beside her. She said nothing, for she had never been able to speak. But her story needs a chapter to itself. End of the chapter. Chapter 2. Lizaveta. There was one circumstance which struck Grigory particularly, and confirmed a very unpleasant and revolting suspicion. This Lizaveta was a dwarfish creature, not 5 foot within a wee bit, as many of the pious old women said pathetically about her, after her death. Her broad, healthy, red face had a look of blank idiocy, and the fixed stare in her eyes was unpleasant, in spite of their meek expression. She wandered about, summer and winter alike, barefooted, wearing nothing but a hempen smock. Her coarse, almost black hair curled like lamb's wool, and formed a sort of huge cap on her head. It was always crusted with mud, and had leaves, bits of stick, and shavings clinging to it, as she always slept on the ground and in the dirt. Her father, a homeless, sickly drunkard, called Ilya, had lost everything and lived many years as a workman with some well-to-do tradespeople. Her mother had long been dead. Spiteful and diseased, Ilya used to beat Lizaveta inhumanly whenever she returned to him. But she rarely did so, for everyone in the town was ready to look after her as being an idiot, and so specially dear to God. Ilya's employers, and many others in the town, especially of the tradespeople, tried to clothe her better, and always rigged her out with high boots and sheepskin coat for the winter. But, although she allowed them to dress her up without resisting, she usually went away, preferably to the cathedral porch, and taking off all that had been given her, kerchief, sheepskin, skirt or boots, she left them there and walked away barefoot in her smock as before. It happened on one occasion that a new governor of the province, making a tour of inspection in our town, saw Lizaveta, and was wounded in his tenderest susceptibilities. And though he was told she was an idiot, he pronounced that for a young woman of 20 to wander about in nothing but a smock was a breach of the proprieties, and must not occur again. But the governor went his way, and Lizaveta was left as she was. At last her father died, which made her even more acceptable in the eyes of the religious persons of the town, as an orphan. In fact, everyone seemed to like her, even the boys did not tease her, and the boys of our town, especially the school boys, are a mischievous set. She would walk into strange houses, and no one drove her away. Everyone was kind to her and gave her something. If she were given a copper, she would take it, and at once drop it in the alms jug of the church or prison. If she were given a roll or bun in the market, she would hand it to the first child she met. Sometimes she would stop one of the richest ladies in the town and give it to her, and the lady would be pleased to take it. She herself never tasted anything but black bread and water. If she went into an expensive shop, where there were costly goods or money lying about, no one kept watch on her, for they knew that if she saw thousands of rubles overlooked by them, she would not have touched a farthing. She scarcely ever went to church. She slept either in the church porch or climbed over a hurdle. There are many hurdles instead of fences to this day in our town, into a kitchen garden. She used at least once a week to turn up at home, that is at the house of her father's former employers, and in the winter went there every night, and slept either in the passage or the cow-house. People were amazed that she could stand such a life, but she was accustomed to it, and, although she was so tiny, she was of a robust constitution. Some of the townspeople declared that she did all this only from pride, but that is hardly credible. She could hardly speak, and only from time to time uttered an inarticulate grunt. How could she have been proud? It happened one clear, warm, moonlight night in September, many years ago. 5 or 6 drunken revellers were returning from the club at a very late hour, according to our provincial notions. They passed through the back way, which led between the back gardens of the houses, with hurdles on either side. This way leads out onto the bridge over the long, stinking pool which we were accustomed to call a river. Among the nettles and burdocks under the hurdle our revellers saw Lizaveta asleep. They stopped to look at her, laughing, and began jesting with unbridled licentiousness. It occurred to one young gentleman to make the whimsical inquiry whether anyone could possibly look upon such an animal as a woman, and so forth. They all pronounced with lofty repugnance that it was impossible. But Fyodor Pavlovitch, who was among them, sprang forward and declared that it was by no means impossible, and that, indeed, there was a certain piquancy about it, and so on. It is true that at that time he was overdoing his part as a buffoon. He liked to put himself forward and entertain the company, ostensibly on equal terms, of course, though in reality he was on a servile footing with them. It was just at the time when he had received the news of his first wife's death in Petersburg, and, with crape upon his hat, was drinking and behaving so shamelessly that even the most reckless among us were shocked at the sight of him. The revellers, of course, laughed at this unexpected opinion, and one of them even began challenging him to act upon it. The others repelled the idea even more emphatically, although still with the utmost hilarity, and at last they went on their way. Later on, Fyodor Pavlovitch swore that he had gone with them. And perhaps it was so, no one knows for certain, and no one ever knew. But 5 or 6 months later, all the town was talking, with intense and sincere indignation, of Lizaveta's condition, and trying to find out who was the miscreant who had wronged her. Then suddenly a terrible rumor was all over the town that this miscreant was no other than Fyodor Pavlovitch. Who set the rumor going? Of that drunken band 5 had left the town, and the only one still among us was an elderly and much respected civil councillor, the father of grown-up daughters, who could hardly have spread the tale, even if there had been any foundation for it. But rumour pointed straight at Fyodor Pavlovitch, and persisted in pointing at him. Of course this was no great grievance to him, he would not have troubled to contradict a set of tradespeople. In those days he was proud, and did not condescend to talk except in his own circle of the officials and nobles, whom he entertained so well. At the time, Grigory stood up for his master vigorously. He provoked quarrels and altercations in defense of him, and succeeded in bringing some people round to his side. "It's the wench's own fault," he asserted, and the culprit was Karp, a dangerous convict, who had escaped from prison and whose name was well known to us, as he had hidden in our town. This conjecture sounded plausible, for it was remembered that Karp had been in the neighborhood just at that time in the autumn, and had robbed 3 people. But this affair and all the talk about it did not estrange popular sympathy from the poor idiot. She was better looked after than ever. A well-to-do merchant's widow named Kondratiev arranged to take her into her house at the end of April, meaning not to let her go out until after the confinement. They kept a constant watch over her, but in spite of their vigilance she escaped on the very last day, and made her way into Fyodor Pavlovitch's garden. How, in her condition, she managed to climb over the high, strong fence remained a mystery. Some maintained that she must have been lifted over by somebody, others hinted at something more uncanny. The most likely explanation is that it happened naturally, that Lizaveta, accustomed to clambering over hurdles to sleep in gardens, had somehow managed to climb this fence, in spite of her condition, and had leapt down, injuring herself. Grigory rushed to Marfa and sent her to Lizaveta, while he ran to fetch an old midwife who lived close by. They saved the baby, but Lizaveta died at dawn. Grigory took the baby, brought it home, and making his wife sit down, put it on her lap. "A child of God, and often is akin to all," he said, "and to us above others. Our little lost one has sent us this, who has come from the devil's son and a holy innocent. Nurse him and weep no more." So Marfa brought up the child. He was christened Pavel. To which people were not slow in adding Fyodorovitch, son of Fyodor. Fyodor Pavlovitch did not object to any of this, and thought it amusing, though he persisted vigorously in denying his responsibility. The townspeople were pleased at his adopting the foundling. Later on, Fyodor Pavlovitch invented a surname for the child, calling him Smerdakov, after his mother's nickname. So this Smerdakov became Fyodor Pavlovitch's second servant, and was living in the lodge with Grigory and Marfa at the time our story begins. He was employed as cook. I ought to say something of this Smerdakov, but I am ashamed of keeping my readers' attention so long occupied with these common menials, and I will go back to my story, hoping to say more of Smerdakov in the course of it. End of the chapter. Chapter 3. The Confession of a Passionate Heart, in verse. Alyosha remained for some time irresolute after hearing the command his father shouted to him from the carriage. But in spite of his uneasiness he did not stand still. That was not his way. He went at once to the kitchen to find out what his father had been doing above. Then he set off, trusting that on the way he would find some answer to the doubt tormenting him. I hasten to add that his father's shouts, commanding him to return home with his mattress and pillow, did not frighten him in the least. He understood perfectly that those peremptory shouts were merely a flourish to produce an effect. In the same way a tradesman in our town who was celebrating his name day with a party of friends, getting angry at being refused more vodka, smashed up his own crockery and furniture and tore his own and his wife's clothes, and finally broke his windows, all for the sake of effect. Next day, of course, when he was sober, he regretted the broken cups and saucers. Alyosha knew that his father would let him go back to the monastery next day, possibly even that evening. Moreover, he was fully persuaded that his father might hurt anyone else, but would not hurt him. Alyosha was certain that no one in the whole world ever would want to hurt him, and, what is more, he knew that no one could hurt him. This was for him an axiom, assumed once for all without question, and he went his way without hesitation, relying on it. But at that moment an anxiety of a different sort disturbed him, and worried him the more because he could not formulate it. It was the fear of a woman, of Katerina Ivanovna, who had so urgently entreated him in the note handed to him by Madame Holikov to come and see her about something. This request and the necessity of going had at once aroused an uneasy feeling in his heart, and this feeling had grown more and more painful all the morning in spite of the scenes at the Hermitage and at the Father Superior's. He was not uneasy because he did not know what she would speak of and what he must answer. And he was not afraid of her simply as a woman. Though he knew little of women, he had spent his life, from early childhood till he entered the monastery, entirely with women. He was afraid of that woman, Katerina Ivanovna. He had been afraid of her from the first time he saw her. He had only seen her 2 or 3 times, and had only chanced to say a few words to her. He thought of her as a beautiful, proud, imperious girl. It was not her beauty which troubled him, but something else. And the vagueness of his apprehension increased the apprehension itself. The girl's aims were of the noblest. He knew that. She was trying to save his brother Dmitri simply through generosity, though he had already behaved badly to her. Yet, although Alyosha recognized and did justice to all these fine and generous sentiments, a shiver began to run down his back as soon as he drew near her house. He reflected that he would not find Ivan, who was so intimate a friend, with her, for Ivan was certainly now with his father. Dmitri he was even more certain not to find there, and he had a foreboding of the reason. And so his conversation would be with her alone. He had a great longing to run and see his brother Dmitri before that fateful interview. Without showing him the letter, he could talk to him about it. But Dmitri lived a long way off, and he was sure to be away from home too. Standing still for a minute, he reached a final decision. Crossing himself with a rapid and accustomed gesture, and at once smiling, he turned resolutely in the direction of his terrible lady. He knew her house. If he went by the high street and then across the marketplace, it was a long way round. Though our town is small, it is scattered, and the houses are far apart. And meanwhile his father was expecting him, and perhaps had not yet forgotten his command. He might be unreasonable, and so he had to make haste to get there and back. So he decided to take a short cut by the back way, for he knew every inch of the ground. This meant skirting fences, climbing over hurdles, and crossing other people's backyards, where everyone he met knew him and greeted him. In this way he could reach the high street in half the time. He had to pass the garden adjoining his father's, and belonging to a little tumble-down house with 4 windows. The owner of this house, as Alyosha knew, was a bedridden old woman, living with her daughter, who had been a genteel maidservant in generals' families in Petersburg. Now she had been at home a year, looking after her sick mother. She always dressed up in fine clothes, though her old mother and she had sunk into such poverty that they went every day to Fyodor Pavlovitch's kitchen for soup and bread, which Marfa gave readily. Yet, though the young woman came up for soup, she had never sold any of her dresses, and one of these even had a long train, a fact which Alyosha had learned from Rakitin, who always knew everything that was going on in the town. He had forgotten it as soon as he heard it, but now, on reaching the garden, he remembered the dress with the train, raised his head, which had been bowed in thought, and came upon something quite unexpected. Over the hurdle in the garden, Dmitri, mounted on something, was leaning forward, gesticulating violently, beckoning to him, obviously afraid to utter a word for fear of being overheard. Alyosha ran up to the hurdle. "It's a good thing you looked up. I was nearly shouting to you," Mitya said in a joyful, hurried whisper. "Climb in here quickly. How splendid that you've come. I was just thinking of you." Alyosha was delighted too, but he did not know how to get over the hurdle. Mitya put his powerful hand under his elbow to help him jump. Tucking up his cassock, Alyosha leapt over the hurdle with the agility of a bare-legged street urchin. "Well done. Now come along," said Mitya in an enthusiastic whisper. "Where?" whispered Alyosha, looking about him and finding himself in a deserted garden with no one near but themselves. The garden was small, but the house was at least 50 paces away. "There's no one here. Why do you whisper?" asked Alyosha. "Why do I whisper? Deuce take it," cried Dmitri at the top of his voice. "You see what silly tricks nature plays one. I am here in secret, and on the watch. I'll explain later on, but, knowing it's a secret, I began whispering like a fool, when there's no need. Let us go. Over there. Till then be quiet. I want to kiss you. Glory to God in the world. Glory to God in me. I was just repeating that, sitting here, before you came." The garden was about 3 acres in extent, and planted with trees only along the fence at the 4 sides. There were apple trees, maples, limes and birch trees. The middle of the garden was an empty grass space, from which several hundredweight of hay was carried in the summer. The garden was let out for a few rubles for the summer. There were also plantations of raspberries and currants and gooseberries laid out along the sides. A kitchen garden had been planted lately near the house. Dmitri led his brother to the most secluded corner of the garden. There, in a thicket of lime trees and old bushes of black currant, elder, snowball tree, and lilac, there stood a tumble-down green summer house, blackened with age. Its walls were of lattice work, but there was still a roof which could give shelter. God knows when this summer house was built. There was a tradition that it had been put up some 50 years before by a retired colonel called von Schmidt. Who owned the house at that time? It was all in decay, the floor was rotting, the planks were loose, the woodwork smelled musty. In the summer house there was a green wooden table fixed in the ground, and round it were some green benches upon which it was still possible to sit. Alyosha had at once observed his brother's exhilarated condition, and on entering the arbor he saw half a bottle of brandy and a wineglass on the table. "That's brandy," Mitya laughed. "I see your look, he's drinking again. Distrust the apparition. Distrust the worthless, lying crowd. And lay aside thy doubts. I'm not drinking, I'm only indulging, as that pig, your Rakitin, says. He'll be a civil councillor one day, but he'll always talk about indulging. Sit down. I could take you in my arms, Alyosha, and press you to my bosom till I crush you, for in the whole world, in reality, can you take it in? I love no one but you." He uttered the last words in a sort of exaltation. "No one but you and one jade I have fallen in love with, to my ruin. But being in love doesn't mean loving. You may be in love with a woman and yet hate her. Remember that. I can talk about it gaily still. Sit down here by the table and I'll sit beside you and look at you, and go on talking. You shall keep quiet and I'll go on talking, for the time has come. But on reflection, you know, I'd better speak quietly, for here you can never tell what ears are listening. I will explain everything, as they say, the story will be continued. Why have I been longing for you? Why have I been thirsting for you all these days, and just now? It's 5 days since I've cast anchor here. Because it's only to you I can tell everything, because I must, because I need you, because tomorrow I shall fly from the clouds, because tomorrow life is ending and beginning. Have you ever dreamt of falling down a precipice into a pit? That's just how I'm falling, but not in a dream. And I'm not afraid, and don't you be afraid. At least, I am afraid, but I enjoy it. It's not enjoyment though, but ecstasy. Damn it all, whatever it is. A strong spirit, a weak spirit, a womanish spirit, whatever it is. Let us praise nature. You see what sunshine, how clear the sky is, the leaves are all green, it's still summer, 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the stillness. Where were you going? I was going to father's, but I meant to go to Katerina Ivanovna's first. To her, and to father. Ooh. What a coincidence. Why was I waiting for you? Hungering and thirsting for you in every cranny of my soul and even in my ribs. Why, to send you to father and to her. Katerina Ivanovna, so as to have done with her and with father. To send an angel. I might have sent anyone, but I wanted to send an angel. And here you are on your way to see father and her. Did you really mean to send me? Cried Alyosha with a distressed expression. Stay. You knew it. And I see you understand it all at once. But be quiet for a time. Don't be sorry, and don't cry. Dmitri stood up, thought a moment, and put his finger to his forehead. She's asked you, written to you a letter or something, that's why you're going to her? You wouldn't be going except for that? Here is her note. Alyosha took it out of his pocket. Mitya looked through it quickly. And you were going the back way. Oh, gods, I thank you for sending him by the back way, and he came to me like the golden fish to the silly old fisherman in the fable. Listen, Alyosha, listen, brother. Now I mean to tell you everything, for I must tell someone. An angel in heaven I've told already, but I want to tell an angel on earth. You are an angel on earth. You will hear and judge and forgive. And that's what I need, that someone above me should forgive. Listen. If two people break away from everything on earth and fly off into the unknown, or at least one of them, and before flying off or going to ruin he comes to someone else and says, do this for me, some favor never asked before that could only be asked on one's deathbed, would that other refuse, if he were a friend or a brother? I will do it, but tell me what it is, and make haste, said Alyosha. Make haste. Don't be in a hurry, Alyosha, you hurry and worry yourself. There's no need to hurry now. Now the world has taken a new turning. Ah, Alyosha, what a pity you can't understand ecstasy. But what am I saying to him? As though you didn't understand it. What an ass I am. What am I saying? Be noble, oh man! Who says that? Alyosha made up his mind to wait. He felt that, perhaps, indeed, his work lay here. Mitya sank into thought for a moment, with his elbow on the table and his head in his hand. Both were silent. Alyosha, said Mitya, you're the only one who won't laugh. I should like to begin my confession with Schiller's Hymn to Joy. And Die Freude. I don't know German, I only know it's called that. Don't think I'm talking nonsense because I'm drunk. I'm not a bit drunk. Brandy's all very well, but I need 2 bottles to make me drunk. Silenus with his rosy fizz. Upon his stumbling ass. But I've not drunk a quarter of a bottle, and I'm not Silenus. I'm not Silenus, though I am strong, for I've made a decision once for all. Forgive me the pun, you'll have to forgive me a lot more than puns today. Don't be uneasy. I'm not spinning it out. I'm talking sense, and I'll come to the point in a minute. I won't keep you in suspense. Stay, how does it go? He raised his head, thought a minute, and began with enthusiasm. Wild and fearful in his cavern hid the naked troglodyte. And the homeless nomad wandered, laying waste the fertile plain, menacing with spear and arrow. In the woods the hunter strayed. Woe to all poor wretches stranded on those cruel and hostile shores. From the peak of high Olympus came the mother seers down, seeking in those savage regions her lost daughter Proserpine. But the goddess found no refuge, found no kindly welcome there, and no temple bearing witness to the worship of the gods. From the fields and from the vineyards came no fruits to deck the feasts. Only flesh of blood-stained victims smoldered on the altar fires. And where the grieving goddess turns her melancholy gaze, sunk in vilest degradation, man his loathsomeness displays. Mitya broke into sobs and seized Alyosha's hand. My dear, in degradation now, too. There's a terrible amount of suffering for man on earth, a terrible lot of trouble. Don't think I'm only a brute in an officer's uniform, wallowing in dirt and drink. I hardly think of anything but of that degraded man, if only I'm not lying. I pray God I'm not lying and showing off. I think about that man because I am that man myself. Would he purge his soul from vileness and attain to light and worth? He must turn and cling forever to his ancient Mother Earth. But the difficulty is, how am I to cling forever to Mother Earth? I don't kiss her. I don't cleave to her bosom. Am I to become a peasant or a shepherd? I go on and I don't know whether I'm going to shame or to light and joy. That's the trouble, for everything in the world is a riddle. And whenever I've happened to sink into the vilest degradation, and it's always been happening, I always read that poem about Sears and Man. Has it reformed me? Never. For I'm a Karamazov. For when I do leap into the pit, I go headlong with my heels up, and am pleased to be falling in that degrading attitude, and pride myself upon it. And in the very depths of that degradation I begin a hymn of praise. Let me be accursed. Let me be vile and base, only let me kiss the hem of the veil in which my God is shrouded. Though I may be following the devil, I am thy son, O Lord, and I love thee, and I feel the joy without which the world cannot stand. Joy everlasting fostereth the soul of all creation. It is her secret ferment fires the cup of life with flame. 'Tis at her beck the grass hath turned each blade towards the light. And solar systems have evolved from chaos and dark night, filling the realms of boundless space, beyond the sage's sight. At bounteous nature's kindly breast, all things that breathe drink joy, and birds and beasts and creeping things, all follow where she leads. Her gifts to man are friends in need. The wreath, the foaming must. To angels, vision of God's throne. To insects, sensual lust. But enough poetry. I am in tears, let me cry. It may be foolishness that everyone would laugh at. But you won't laugh. Your eyes are shining, too. Enough poetry. I want to tell you now about the insects to whom God gave sensual lust. To insects, sensual lust. I am that insect, brother, and it is said of me specially. All we Karamazovs are such insects, and, angel as you are, that insect lives in you, too, and will stir up a tempest in your blood. Tempests, because sensual lust is a tempest, worse than a tempest. Beauty is a terrible and awful thing. It is terrible because it has not been fathomed and never can be fathomed, for God sets us nothing but riddles. Here the boundaries meet and all contradictions exist side by side. I am not a cultivated man, brother, but I've thought a lot about this. It's terrible what mysteries there are. Too many riddles weigh men down on earth. We must solve them as we can, and try to keep a dry skin in the water. Beauty. I can't endure the thought that a man of lofty mind and heart begins with the ideal of the Madonna and ends with the ideal of Sodom. What's still more awful is that a man with the ideal of Sodom in his soul does not renounce the ideal of the Madonna, and his heart may be on fire with that ideal, genuinely on fire, just as in his days of youth and innocence. Yes, man is broad, too broad, indeed. I'd have him narrower. The devil only knows what to make of it. What to the mind is shameful is beauty and nothing else to the heart. Is there beauty in Sodom? Believe me, that for the immense mass of mankind beauty is found in Sodom. Did you know that secret? The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there and the battlefield is the heart of man. But a man always talks of his own ache. Listen, now to come to facts. End of the chapter. Chapter 4. The Confession of a Passionate Heart, in Anecdote. I was leading a wild life then. Father said just now that I spent several thousand rubles in seducing young girls. That's a swinish invention, and there was nothing of the sort. And if there was, I didn't need money simply for that. With me money is an accessory, the overflow of my heart, the framework. Today she would be my lady, tomorrow a wench out of the streets in her place. I entertained them both. I threw away money by the handful on music, rioting, and gypsies. Sometimes I gave it to the ladies, too, for they'll take it greedily, that must be admitted, and be pleased and thankful for it. Ladies used to be fond of me, not all of them, but it happened. But I always liked side paths, little dark back alleys behind the main road, there one finds adventures and surprises, and precious metal in the dirt. I am speaking figuratively, brother. In the town I was in, there were no such back alleys in the literal sense. But morally there were. If you were like me, you'd know what that means. I loved vice, I loved the ignominy of vice. I loved cruelty. Am I not a bug, am I not a noxious insect? In fact, to Karamazov. Once we went, a whole lot of us, for a picnic, in 7 sledges. It was dark, it was winter, and I began squeezing a girl's hand, and forced her to kiss me. She was the daughter of an official, a sweet, gentle, submissive creature. She allowed me much in the dark. She thought, poor thing, that I should come next day to make her an offer. I was looked upon as a good match, too. But I didn't say a word to her for 5 months. I used to see her in a corner at dances, we were always having dances, her eyes watching me. I saw how they glowed with fire, a fire of gentle indignation. This game only tickled that insect lust I cherished in my soul. 5 months later she married an official and left the town, still angry, and still, perhaps, in love with me. Now they live happily. Observe that I told no one. I didn't boast of it. Though I'm full of low desires, and love what's low, I'm not dishonorable. You're blushing, your eyes flashed. Enough of this filth with you. And all this was nothing much. Wayside blossoms à la Paul de Kock, though the cruel insect had already grown strong in my soul. I've a perfect album of reminiscences, brother. God bless them, the darlings. I tried to break it off without quarreling. And I never gave them away. I never bragged of one of them. But that's enough. You can't suppose I brought you here simply to talk of such nonsense. No, I'm going to tell you something more curious, and don't be surprised that I'm glad to tell you, instead of being ashamed. You say that because I blushed, Alyosha said suddenly. I wasn't blushing at what you were saying or at what you've done. I blushed because I am the same as you are. You? Come, that's going a little too far. No, it's not too far, said Alyosha warmly. Obviously the idea was not a new one. The ladder's the same. I'm at the bottom step, and you're above, somewhere about the 13th. That's how I see it. But it's all the same. Absolutely the same in kind. Anyone on the bottom step is bound to go up to the top one. Then one ought not to step on at all. Anyone who can help it had better not. But can you? I think not. Hush, Alyosha, hush, darling. I could kiss your hand, you touch me so. That rogue Grushenka has an eye for men. She told me once that she'd devour you one day. There, I won't. From this field of corruption fouled by flies, let's pass to my tragedy, also befouled by flies, that is by every sort of vileness. Although the old man told lies about my seducing innocence, there really was something of the sort in my tragedy, though it was only once, and then it did not come off. The old man who has reproached me with what never happened does not even know of this fact. I never told anyone about it. You're the first, except Ivan. Of course, Ivan knows everything. He knew about it long before you. But Ivan's a tomb. Ivan's a tomb? Yes. Alyosha listened with great attention. I was lieutenant in a line regiment, but still I was under supervision, like a kind of convict. Yet I was awfully well received in the little town. I spent money right and left. I was thought to be rich. I thought so myself. But I must have pleased them in other ways as well. Although they shook their heads over me, they liked me. My colonel, who was an old man, took a sudden dislike to me. He was always down upon me, but I had powerful friends, and, moreover, all the town was on my side, so he couldn't do me much harm. I was in fault myself for refusing to treat him with proper respect. I was proud. This obstinate old fellow, who was really a very good sort, kind-hearted and hospitable, had had 2 wives, both dead. His first wife, who was of a humble family, left a daughter as unpretentious as herself. She was a young woman of 24 when I was there, and was living with her father and an aunt, her mother's sister. The aunt was simple and illiterate, the niece was simple but lively. I like to say nice things about people. I never knew a woman of more charming character than Agofia. Fancy, her name was Agofia Ivanovna. And she wasn't bad looking either, in the Russian style, tall, stout, with a full figure, and beautiful eyes, though a rather coarse face. She had not married, although she had had 2 suitors. She refused them, but was as cheerful as ever. I was intimate with her, not in that way, it was pure friendship. I have often been friendly with women quite innocently. I used to talk to her with shocking frankness, and she only laughed. Many women like such freedom, and she was a girl too, which made it very amusing. Another thing, one could never think of her as a young lady. She and her aunt lived in her father's house with a sort of voluntary humility, not putting themselves on an equality with other people. She was a general favorite, and of use to everyone, for she was a clever dressmaker. She had a talent for it. She gave her services freely without asking for payment, but if anyone offered her payment, she didn't refuse. The colonel, of course, was a very different matter. He was one of the chief personages in the district. He kept open house, entertained the whole town, gave suppers and dances. At the time I arrived and joined the battalion, all the town was talking of the expected return of the colonel's second daughter, a great beauty, who had just left a fashionable school in the capital. This second daughter is Katerina Ivanovna, and she was the child of the second wife, who belonged to a distinguished general's family, although, as I learnt on good authority, she too brought the colonel no money. She had connections, and that was all. There may have been expectations, but they had come to nothing. Yet, when the young lady came from boarding school on a visit, the whole town revived. Our most distinguished ladies, 2 excellencies and a colonel's wife, and all the rest following their lead, at once took her up and gave entertainments in her honor. She was the belle of the balls and picnics, and they got up tableaux vivant in aid of distressed governesses. I took no notice, I went on as wildly as before, and one of my exploits at the time set all the town talking. I saw her eyes taking my measure one evening at the battery commander's, but I didn't go up to her, as though I disdained her acquaintance. I did go up and speak to her at an evening party not long after. She scarcely looked at me, and compressed her lips scornfully. Wait a bit. I'll have my revenge, thought I. I behaved like an awful fool on many occasions at that time, and I was conscious of it myself. What made it worse was that I felt that Kotenka was not an innocent boarding school miss, but a person of character, proud and really high-principled. Above all, she had education and intellect. And I had neither. You think I meant to make her an offer? No, I simply wanted to revenge myself, because I was such a hero and she didn't seem to feel it. Meanwhile, I spent my time in drink and riot, till the lieutenant colonel put me under arrest for 3 days. Just at that time father sent me 6,000 rubles in return for my sending him a deed giving up all claims upon him, settling our accounts, so to speak, and saying that I wouldn't expect anything more. I didn't understand a word of it at the time. Until I came here, Alyosha, till the last few days, indeed, perhaps even now, I haven't been able to make head or tail of my money affairs with father. But never mind that, we'll talk of it later. Just as I received the money, I got a letter from a friend telling me something that interested me immensely. The authorities, I learnt, were dissatisfied with our lieutenant colonel. He was suspected of irregularities, in fact, his enemies were preparing a surprise for him. And then the commander of the division arrived, and kicked up the devil of a shindy. Shortly afterwards he was ordered to retire. I won't tell you how it all happened. He had enemies certainly. Suddenly there was a marked coolness in the town towards him and all his family. His friends all turned their backs on him. Then I took my first step. I met Agofia Ivanovna, with whom I'd always kept up a friendship, and said, "Do you know there's a deficit of 4,500 rubles of government money in your father's accounts?" "What do you mean? What makes you say so? The general was here not long ago, and everything was all right." "Then it was, but now it isn't." She was terribly scared. "Don't frighten me," she said. Who told you so? Don't be uneasy, I said, I won't tell anyone. You know I'm as silent as the tomb. I only wanted, in view of possibilities, to add, that when they demand that 4,500 rubles from your father, and he can't produce it, he'll be tried, and made to serve as a common soldier in his old age, unless you like to send me your young lady secretly. I've just had money paid me. I'll give her 4,000, if you like, and keep the secret religiously. Ah, you scoundrel! ! That's what she said. You wicked scoundrel! How dare you! She went away furiously indignant, while I shouted after her once more that the secret should be kept sacred. Those two simple creatures, Agofia and her aunt, I may as well say at once, behaved like perfect angels all through this business. They genuinely adored their Katia, thought her far above them, and waited on her, hand and foot. But Agofia told her of our conversation. I found that out afterwards. She didn't keep it back, and of course that was all I wanted. Suddenly the new major arrived to take command of the battalion. The old lieutenant colonel was taken ill at once, couldn't leave his room for 2 days, and didn't hand over the government money. Dr. Kravchenko declared that he really was ill. But I knew for a fact, and had known for a long time, that for the last 4 years the money had never been in his hands except when the commander made his visits of inspection. He used to lend it to a trustworthy person, a merchant of our town called Trifonov. An old widower, with a big beard and gold-rimmed spectacles. He used to go to the fair, do a profitable business with the money, and return the whole sum to the colonel, bringing with it a present from the fair, as well as interest on the loan. But this time, I heard all about it quite by chance from Trifonov's son and heir, a drivelling youth and one of the most vicious in the world. This time, I say. Trifonov brought nothing back from the fair. The lieutenant colonel flew to him. I've never received any money from you, and couldn't possibly have received any. That was all the answer he got. So now our lieutenant colonel is confined to the house, with a towel round his head, while they're all three busy putting ice on it. All at once an orderly arrives on the scene with the book and the order to hand over the battalion money immediately, within 2 hours. He signed the book, I saw the signature in the book afterwards, stood up, saying he would put on his uniform, ran to his bedroom, loaded his double-barreled gun with a service bullet, took the boot off his right foot, fixed the gun against his chest, and began feeling for the trigger with his foot. But Agofia, remembering what I had told her, had her suspicions. She stole up and peeped into the room just in time. She rushed in, flung herself upon him from behind, threw her arms round him, and the gun went off, hit the ceiling, but hurt no one. The others ran in, took away the gun, and held him by the arms. I heard all about this afterwards. I was at home, it was getting dusk, and I was just preparing to go out. I had dressed, brushed my hair, scented my handkerchief, and taken up my cap, when suddenly the door opened, and facing me in the room stood Katerina Ivanovna. It's strange how things happen sometimes. No one had seen her in the street, so that no one knew of it in the town. I lodged with 2 decrepit old ladies, who looked after me. They were most obliging old things, ready to do anything for me, and at my request were as silent afterwards as 2 cast-iron posts. Of course I grasped the position at once. She walked in and looked straight at me, her dark eyes determined, even defiant, but on her lips and round her mouth I saw uncertainty. My sister told me, she began, that you would give me 4,500 rubles if I came to you for it, myself. I have come, give me the money. She couldn't keep it up. She was breathless, frightened, her voice failed her, and the corners of her mouth and the lines round it quivered. Alyosha, are you listening, or are you asleep? Mitya, I know you will tell the whole truth, said Alyosha in agitation. I am telling it. If I tell the whole truth just as it happened I shan't spare myself. My first idea was a Karamazov one. Once I was bitten by a centipede, brother, and laid up a fortnight with fever from it. Well, I felt a centipede biting at my heart then, a noxious insect, you understand? I looked her up and down. You've seen her? She's a beauty. But she was beautiful in another way then. At that moment she was beautiful because she was noble, and I was a scoundrel, she in all the grandeur of her generosity and sacrifice for her father, and I, a bug. And, scoundrel as I was, she was altogether at my mercy, body and soul. She was hemmed in. I tell you frankly, that thought, that venomous thought, so possessed my heart that it almost swooned with suspense. It seemed as if there could be no resisting it, as though I should act like a bug, like a venomous spider, without a spark of pity. I could scarcely breathe. Understand, I should have gone next day to ask for her hand, so that it might end honorably, so to speak, and that nobody would or could know. For though I'm a man of base desires, I'm honest. And at that very second some voice seemed to whisper in my ear. But when you come tomorrow to make your proposal, that girl won't even see you, she'll order her coachman to kick you out of the yard. Publish it through all the town, she would say, I'm not afraid of you. I looked at the young lady, my voice had not deceived me. That is how it would be, not a doubt of it. I could see from her face now that I should be turned out of the house. My spite was roused. I longed to play her the nastiest swinish cad's trick, to look at her with a sneer, and on the spot where she stood before me to stun her with a tone of voice that only a shopman could use. 4,000. What do you mean? I was joking. You've been counting your chickens too easily, madam. 200, if you like, with all my heart. But 4,000 is not a sum to throw away on such frivolity. You've put yourself out to no purpose. I should have lost the game, of course. She'd have run away. But it would have been an infernal revenge. It would have been worth it all. I'd have howled with regret all the rest of my life, only to have played that trick. Would you believe it, it has never happened to me with any other woman, not one, to look at her at such a moment with hatred. But, on my oath, I looked at her for 3 seconds, or 5 perhaps, with fearful hatred, that hate which is only a hair's breadth from love, from the maddest love. I went to the window, put my forehead against the frozen pane, and I remember the ice burnt my forehead like fire. I did not keep her long, don't be afraid. I turned round, went up to the table, opened the drawer and took out a banknote for 5,000 rubles, it was lying in a French dictionary. Then I showed it her in silence, folded it, handed it to her, opened the door into the passage, and, stepping back, made her a deep bow, a most respectful, a most impressive bow, believe me. She shuddered all over, gazed at me for a second, turned horribly pale, white as a sheet, in fact, and all at once, not impetuously but softly, gently, bowed down to my feet, not a boarding school curtsy, but a Russian bow, with her forehead to the floor. She jumped up and ran away. I was wearing my sword. I drew it and nearly stabbed myself with it on the spot. Why, I don't know. It would have been frightfully stupid, of course. I suppose it was from delight. Can you understand that one might kill oneself from delight? But I didn't stab myself. I only kissed my sword and put it back in the scabbard, which there was no need to have told you, by the way. And I fancy that in telling you about my inner conflict I have laid it on rather thick to glorify myself. But let it pass, and to hell with all who pry into the human heart. Well, so much for that adventure with Katerina Ivanovna. So now Ivan knows of it, and you, no one else. Dmitri got up, took a step or two in his excitement, pulled out his handkerchief and mopped his forehead, then sat down again, not in the same place as before, but on the opposite side, so that Alyosha had to turn quite round to face him. End of the chapter. Chapter 5. The confession of a passionate heart, heals up. Now, said Alyosha, I understand the first half. You understand the first half. That half is a drama, and it was played out there. The second half is a tragedy, and it is being acted here. And I understand nothing of that second half so far, said Alyosha. And I? Do you suppose I understand it? Stop, Dmitri. There's one important question. Tell me, you were betrothed, you are betrothed still? We weren't betrothed at once, not for 3 months after that adventure. The next day I told myself that the incident was closed, concluded that there would be no sequel. It seemed to me caddish to make her an offer. On her side she gave no sign of life for the 6 weeks that she remained in the town, except, indeed, for one action. The day after her visit the maid-servant slipped round with an envelope addressed to me. I tore it open. It contained the change out of the banknote. Only 4,500 rubles was needed. But there was a discount of about 200 on changing it. She only sent me about 260. I don't remember exactly. But not a note, not a word of explanation. I searched the packet for a pencil mark, and nothing. Well, I spent the rest of the money on such an orgy that the new major was obliged to reprimand me. Well, the lieutenant colonel produced the battalion money, to the astonishment of everyone, for nobody believed that he had the money untouched. He'd no sooner paid it than he fell ill, took to his bed, and, 3 weeks later, softening of the brain set in, and he died 5 days afterwards. He was buried with military honors, for he had not had time to receive his discharge. 10 days after his funeral, Katerina Ivanovna, with her aunt and sister, went to Moscow. And, behold, on the very day they went away, I hadn't seen them, didn't see them off or take leave. I received a tiny note, a sheet of thin blue paper, and on it only one line in pencil: "I will write to you. Wait. K." And that was all. I'll explain the rest now, in 2 words. In Moscow their fortunes changed with the swiftness of lightning and the unexpectedness of an Arabian fairy tale. That general's widow, their nearest relation, suddenly lost the 2 nieces who were her heiresses and next of kin. Both died in the same week of smallpox. The old lady, prostrated with grief, welcomed Katya as a daughter, as her one hope, clutched at her, altered her will in Katya's favor. But that concerned the future. Meanwhile she gave her, for present use, 80,000 rubles, as a marriage portion, to do what she liked with. She was an hysterical woman. I saw something of her in Moscow, later. Well, suddenly I received by post 4,500 rubles. I was speechless with surprise, as you may suppose. 3 days later came the promised letter. I have it with me now. You must read it. She offers to be my wife, offers herself to me. I love you madly, she says, even if you don't love me, never mind. Be my husband. Don't be afraid. I won't hamper you in any way. I will be your chattel. I will be the carpet under your feet. I want to love you forever. I want to save you from yourself. Alyosha, I am not worthy to repeat those lines in my vulgar words and in my vulgar tone, my everlastingly vulgar tone, that I can never cure myself of. That letter stabs me even now. Do you think I don't mind, that I don't mind still? I wrote her an answer at once, as it was impossible for me to go to Moscow. I wrote to her with tears. One thing I shall be ashamed of forever. I referred to her being rich and having a dowry while I was only a stuck-up beggar. I mentioned money. I ought to have borne it in silence, but it slipped from my pen. Then I wrote at once to Ivan, and told him all I could about it in a letter of 6 pages, and sent him to her. Why do you look like that? Why are you staring at me? Yes, Ivan fell in love with her, he's in love with her still. I know that. I did a stupid thing, in the world's opinion, but perhaps that one stupid thing may be the saving of us all now. Ooh. Don't you see what a lot she thinks of Ivan, how she respects him? When she compares us, do you suppose she can love a man like me, especially after all that has happened here? But I am convinced that she does love a man like you, and not a man like him. She loves her own virtue, not me. The words broke involuntarily, and almost malignantly, from Dmitri. He laughed, but a minute later his eyes gleamed, he flushed crimson and struck the table violently with his fist. I swear, Alyosha, he cried, with intense and genuine anger at himself, you may not believe me, but as God is holy, and as Christ is God, I swear that though I smiled at her lofty sentiments just now, I know that I am 1,000,000 times baser in soul than she, and that these lofty sentiments of hers are as sincere as a heavenly angel's. That's the tragedy of it, that I know that for certain. What if anyone does show off a bit? Don't I do it myself? And yet I'm sincere, I'm sincere. As for Ivan, I can understand how he must be cursing nature now, with his intellect, too. To see the preference given, to whom, to what? To a monster who, though he is betrothed and all eyes are fixed on him, can't restrain his debaucheries, and before the very eyes of his betrothed. And a man like me is preferred, while he is rejected. And why? Because a girl wants to sacrifice her life and destiny out of gratitude. It's ridiculous. I've never said a word of this to Ivan, and Ivan of course has never dropped a hint of the sort to me. But destiny will be accomplished, and the best man will hold his ground while the undeserving one will vanish into his back alley forever, his filthy back alley, his beloved back alley, where he is at home and where he will sink in filth and stench at his own free will and with enjoyment. I've been talking foolishly. I've no words left. I use them at random, but it will be as I have said. I shall drown in the back alley, and she will marry Ivan. Stop, Dmitri, Alyosha interrupted again with great anxiety. There's one thing you haven't made clear yet, you are still betrothed all the same, aren't you? How can you break off the engagement if she, your betrothed, doesn't want to? Yes, formally and solemnly betrothed. It was all done on my arrival in Moscow, with great ceremony, with icons, all in fine style. The general's wife blessed us, and, would you believe it? Congratulated Katya. You've made a good choice, she said, I see right through him. And, would you believe it? She didn't like Ivan, and hardly greeted him. I had a lot of talk with Katya in Moscow. I told her about myself, sincerely, honorably. She listened to everything. There was sweet confusion. There were tender words. Though there were proud words, too. She wrung out of me a mighty promise to reform. I gave my promise, and here. What? Why, I called to you and brought you out here today, this very day, remember it, to send you, this very day again, to Katerina Ivanovna, and... What? To tell her that I shall never come to see her again. Say, he sends you his compliments. But is that possible? That's just the reason I'm sending you, in my place, because it's impossible. And, how could I tell her myself? And where are you going? To the back alley. To Grushenka, then, Alyosha exclaimed mournfully, clasping his hands. Can Rakitin really have told the truth? I thought that you had just visited her, and that was all. Can a betrothed man pay such visits? Is such a thing possible, and with such a betrothed, and before the eyes of all the world? Confound it, I have some honor. As soon as I began visiting Grushenka, I ceased to be betrothed, and to be an honest man. I understand that. Why do you look at me? You see, I went in the first place to beat her. I had heard, and I know for a fact now, that captain, father's agent, had given Grushenka an IOU of mine for her to sue me for payment, so as to put an end to me. They wanted to scare me. I went to beat her. I had had a glimpse of her before. She doesn't strike one at first sight. I knew about her old merchant, who's lying ill now, paralyzed, but he's leaving her a decent little sum. I knew, too, that she was fond of money, that she hoarded it, and lent it at a wicked rate of interest, that she's a merciless cheat and swindler. I went to beat her, and I stayed. The storm broke, it struck me down like the plague. I'm plague-stricken still, and I know that everything is over, that there will never be anything more for me. The cycle of the ages is accomplished. That's my position. And though I'm a beggar, as fate would have it, I had 3,000 just then in my pocket. I drove with Grushenka to Mokray, a place 25 versts from here. I got gypsies there and champagne and made all the peasants there drunk on it, and all the women and girls. I sent the thousands flying. In 3 days' time I was stripped bare, but a hero. Do you suppose the hero had gained his end? Not a sign of it from her. I tell you that rogue, Grushenka, has a supple curve all over her body. You can see it in her little foot, even in her little toe. I saw it, and kissed it, but that was all, I swear. I'll marry you if you like, she said, You're a beggar, you know. Say that you won't beat me, and will let me do anything I choose, and perhaps I will marry you." She laughed, and she's laughing still. Dmitri leapt up with a sort of fury. He seemed all at once as though he were drunk. His eyes became suddenly bloodshot. "And do you really mean to marry her?" "At once, if she will. And if she won't, I shall stay all the same. I'll be the porter at her gate." "Alyosha," he cried. He stopped short before him, and taking him by the shoulders began shaking him violently. "Do you know, you innocent boy, that this is all delirium, senseless delirium, for there's a tragedy here. Let me tell you, Alexei, that I may be a low man, with low and degraded passions, but a thief and a pickpocket Dmitri Karamazov never can be. Well, then, let me tell you that I am a thief and a pickpocket. That very morning, just before I went to beat Grushenka, Katerina Ivanovna sent for me, and in strict secrecy, why I don't know, I suppose she had some reason, asked me to go to the chief town of the province and to post 3,000 rubles to Agofia Ivanovna in Moscow, so that nothing should be known of it in the town here. So I had that 3,000 rubles in my pocket when I went to see Grushenka, and it was that money we spent at Mokray. Afterwards I pretended I had been to the town, but did not show her the post office receipt. I said I had sent the money and would bring the receipt, and so far I haven't brought it. I've forgotten it. Now what do you think you're going to her today to say? He sends his compliments, and she'll ask you, what about the money? You might still have said to her. He's a degraded sensualist, and a low creature, with uncontrolled passions. He didn't send your money then, but wasted it, because, like a low brute, he couldn't control himself. But still you might have added. He isn't a thief though. Here is your 3,000, he sends it back. Send it yourself to Agofia Ivanovna. But he told me to say he sends his compliments. But, as it is, she will ask, but where is the money? Mitya, you are unhappy, yes. But not as unhappy as you think. Don't worry yourself to death with despair. What, do you suppose I'd shoot myself because I can't get 3,000 to pay back? That's just it. I shan't shoot myself. I haven't the strength now. Afterwards, perhaps. But now I'm going to Grushenka. I don't care what happens. And what then? I'll be her husband if she deigns to have me, and when lovers come, I'll go into the next room. I'll clean her friends' galoshes, blow up their samovar, run their errands. Katerina Ivanovna will understand it all, Alyosha said solemnly. She'll understand how great this trouble is and will forgive. She has a lofty mind, and no one could be more unhappy than you. She'll see that for herself. She won't forgive everything, said Dmitri, with a grin. There's something in it, brother, that no woman could forgive. Do you know what would be the best thing to do? What? Pay back the 3,000. Where can we get it from? I say, I have 2,000. Ivan will give you another 1,000, that makes 3. Take it and pay it back. And when would you get it, your 3,000? You're not of age, besides, and you absolutely must, take my farewell to her today, with the money or without it, for I can't drag on any longer, things have come to such a pass. Tomorrow is too late. I shall send you to father. To father? Yes, to father first. Ask him for 3,000. But, Mitya, he won't give it. As though he would. I know he won't. Do you know the meaning of despair, Alexei? Yes. Listen. Legally he owes me nothing. I've had it all from him, I know that. But morally he owes me something, doesn't he? You know he started with 28,000 of my mother's money and made 100,000 with it. Let him give me back only 3 out of the 28,000, and he'll draw my soul out of hell, and it will atone for many of his sins. For that 3,000, I give you my solemn word, I'll make an end of everything, and he shall hear nothing more of me. For the last time I give him the chance to be a father. Tell him God himself sends him this chance. Mitya, he won't give it for anything. I know he won't. I know it perfectly well. Now, especially. That's not all. I know something more. Now, only a few days ago, perhaps only yesterday, he found out for the first time in earnest, underline in earnest, that Grushenka is really perhaps not joking, and really means to marry me. He knows her nature, he knows the cat. And do you suppose he's going to give me money to help to bring that about when he's crazy about her himself? And that's not all, either. I can tell you more than that. I know that for the last 5 days he has had 3,000 drawn out of the bank, changed into notes of 100 rubles, packed into a large envelope, sealed with 5 seals, and tied across with red tape. You see how well I know all about it. On the envelope is written, "To my angel, Grushenka, when she will come to me." He scrawled it himself in silence and in secret, and no one knows that the money's there except the valet, Smerdakov, whom he trusts like himself. So now he has been expecting Grushenka for the last 3 or 4 days. He hopes she'll come for the money. He has sent her word of it, and she has sent him word that perhaps she'll come. And if she does go to the old man, can I marry her after that? You understand now why I'm here in secret and what I'm on the watch for. For her? Yes, for her. Foma has a room in the house of these sluts here. Foma comes from our parts, he was a soldier in our regiment. He does jobs for them. He's watchman at night and goes grouse shooting in the daytime. And that's how he lives. I've established myself in his room. Neither he nor the women of the house know the secret, that is, that I am on the watch here. No one but Smerdakov knows, then? No one else. He will let me know if she goes to the old man. It was he told you about the money, then? Yes. It's a dead secret. Even Ivan doesn't know about the money, or anything. The old man is sending Ivan to Chermoshnya on a 2 or 3 days journey. A purchaser has turned up for the copse. He'll give 8,000 for the timber. So the old man keeps asking Ivan to help him by going to arrange it. It will take him 2 or 3 days. That's what the old man wants, so that Grushenka can come while he's away. Then he's expecting Grushenka today? No, she won't come today, there are signs. She's certain not to come, cried Mitya suddenly. Smerdakov thinks so, too. Father's drinking now. He's sitting at table with Ivan. Go to him, Alyosha, and ask for the 3,000. Mitya, dear, what's the matter with you? Cried Alyosha, jumping up from his place, and looking keenly at his brother's frenzied face. For one moment the thought struck him that Dmitri was mad. What is it? I'm not insane, said Dmitri, looking intently and earnestly at him. No fear. I am sending you to father, and I know what I'm saying. I believe in miracles. In miracles? In a miracle of divine providence. God knows my heart. He sees my despair. He sees the whole picture. Surely he won't let something awful happen. Alyosha, I believe in miracles. Go. I am going. Tell me, will you wait for me here? Yes. I know it will take some time. You can't go at him point blank. He's drunk now. I'll wait 3 hours, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only remember you must go to Katerina Ivanovna today, if it has to be at midnight. With the money or without the money, and say, he sends his compliments to you. I want you to say that verse to her, he sends his compliments to you. Mitya. And what if Grushenka comes today, if not today, tomorrow, or the next day? Grushenka? I shall see her. I shall rush out and prevent it. And if there's an if, it will be murder. I couldn't endure it. Who will be murdered? The old man. I shan't kill her. Brother, what are you saying? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Perhaps I shan't kill, and perhaps I shall. I'm afraid that he will suddenly become so loathsome to me with his face at that moment. I hate his ugly throat, his nose, his eyes, his shameless snigger. I feel a physical repulsion. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what may be too much for me. I'll go, Mitya. I believe that God will order things for the best, that nothing awful may happen. and I will sit and wait for the miracle. And if it doesn't come to pass. Alyosha went thoughtfully towards his father's house. End of the chapter. Chapter 6. Smerdakov. He did in fact find his father still at table. Though there was a dining room in the house, the table was laid as usual in the drawing room, which was the largest room, and furnished with old-fashioned ostentation. The furniture was white and very old, upholstered in old, red, silky material. In the spaces between the windows there were mirrors in elaborate white and gilt frames, of old-fashioned carving. On the walls, covered with white paper, which was torn in many places, there hung two large portraits, one of some prince who had been governor of the district 30 years before, and the other of some bishop, also long since dead. In the corner opposite the door there were several icons, before which a lamp was lighted at nightfall, not so much for devotional purposes as to light the room. Fyodor Pavlovitch used to go to bed very late, at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and would wander about the room at night or sit in an armchair, thinking. This had become a habit with him. He often slept quite alone in the house, sending his servants to the lodge. But usually Smerdakov remained, sleeping on a bench in the hall. When Alyosha came in, dinner was over, but coffee and preserves had been served. Fyodor Pavlovitch liked sweet things with brandy after dinner. Ivan was also at table, sipping coffee. The servants, Grigory and Smerdakov, were standing by. Both the gentlemen and the servants seemed in singularly good spirits. Fyodor Pavlovitch was roaring with laughter. Before he entered the room, Alyosha heard the shrill laugh he knew so well, and could tell from the sound of it that his father had only reached the good-humored stage, and was far from being completely drunk. "Here he is! Here he is!" yelled Fyodor Pavlovitch, highly delighted at seeing Alyosha. "Join us. Sit down. Coffee is a Lenten dish, but it's hot and good. I don't offer you brandy, you're keeping the fast. But would you like some? No, I'd better give you some of our famous liqueur. Smerdakov, go to the cupboard, the second shelf on the right. Here are the keys. Look sharp." Alyosha began refusing the liqueur. "Never mind. If you won't have it, we will," said Fyodor Pavlovitch, beaming. "But stay, have you dined?" "Yes," answered Alyosha, who had in truth only eaten a piece of bread and drunk a glass of kvass in the Father Superior's kitchen. "Though I should be pleased to have some hot coffee." "Bravo, my darling. He'll have some coffee. Does it want warming?" "No, it's boiling. It's capital coffee, Smerdakov's making. My Smerdakov's an artist at coffee and at fish patties, and at fish soup, too. You must come one day and have some fish soup. Let me know beforehand. But, stay, didn't I tell you this morning to come home with your mattress and pillow and all? Have you brought your mattress? He. No, I haven't, said Alyosha, smiling, too. Ah, but you were frightened this morning, weren't you? There, my darling, I couldn't do anything to vex you. Do you know, Ivan, I can't resist the way he looks one straight in the face and laughs. It makes me laugh all over. I'm so fond of him. Alyosha, let me give you my blessing, a father's blessing. Alyosha rose, but Fyodor Pavlovitch had already changed his mind. No, he said. I'll just make the sign of the cross over you, for now. Sit still. Now we've a treat for you, in your own line, too. It'll make you laugh. Balaam's ass has begun talking to us here, and how he talks. Balaam's ass, it appeared, was the valet, Smerdakov. He was a young man of about 24, remarkably unsociable and taciturn. Not that he was shy or bashful. On the contrary, he was conceited and seemed to despise everybody. But we must pause to say a few words about him now. He was brought up by Grigory and Marfa, but the boy grew up with no sense of gratitude. As Grigory expressed it, he was an unfriendly boy, and seemed to look at the world mistrustfully. In his childhood he was very fond of hanging cats, and burying them with great ceremony. He used to dress up in a sheet as though it were a surplice, and sang, and waved some object over the dead cat as though it were a censer. All this he did on the sly, with the greatest secrecy. Grigory caught him once at this diversion and gave him a sound beating. He shrank into a corner and sulked there for a week. "He doesn't care for you or me, the monster," Grigory used to say to Marfa, "and he doesn't care for anyone. Are you a human being?" he said, addressing the boy directly. "You're not a human being. You grew from the mildew in the bathhouse. Too, that's what you are." Smerdakov, it appeared afterwards, could never forgive him those words. Grigory taught him to read and write, and when he was 12 years old, began teaching him the scriptures. But this teaching came to nothing. At the second or third lesson the boy suddenly grinned. "What's that for?" asked Grigory, looking at him threateningly from under his spectacles. "Oh, nothing. God created light on the first day, and the sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day. Where did the light come from on the first day?" Grigory was thunderstruck. The boy looked sarcastically at his teacher. There was something positively condescending in his expression. Grigory could not restrain himself. "I'll show you where," he cried, and gave the boy a violent slap on the cheek. The boy took the slap without a word, but withdrew into his corner again for some days. A week later he had his first attack of the disease to which he was subject all the rest of his life, epilepsy. When Fyodor Pavlovitch heard of it, his attitude to the boy seemed changed at once. Till then he had taken no notice of him, though he never scolded him, and always gave him a kopeck when he met him. Sometimes, when he was in good humor, he would send the boy something sweet from his table. But as soon as he heard of his illness, he showed an active interest in him, sent for a doctor, and tried remedies, but the disease turned out to be incurable. The fits occurred, on an average, once a month, but at various intervals. The fits varied too, in violence, some were light and some were very severe. Fyodor Pavlovitch strictly forbade Grigory to use corporal punishment to the boy, and began allowing him to come upstairs to him. He forbade him to be taught anything whatever for a time, too. One day when the boy was about 15, Fyodor Pavlovitch noticed him lingering by the bookcase, and reading the titles through the glass. Fyodor Pavlovitch had a fair number of books, over 100, but no one ever saw him reading. He at once gave Smerdakov the key of the bookcase. "Come, read. You shall be my librarian. You'll be better sitting reading than hanging about the courtyard. Come, read this," and Fyodor Pavlovitch gave him evenings in a cottage near Dekanka. He read a little but didn't like it. He did not once smile, and ended by frowning. "Why? Isn't it funny?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch. Smerdakov did not speak. "Answer, stupid." "It's all untrue," mumbled the boy, with a grin. "Then go to the devil. You have the soul of a lackey. Stay, here's Smaragdov's Universal History. That's all true. Read that." But Smerdakov did not get through 10 pages of Smaragdov. He thought it dull. So the bookcase was closed again. Shortly afterwards Marfa and Grigory reported to Fyodor Pavlovitch that Smerdakov was gradually beginning to show an extraordinary fastidiousness. He would sit before his soup, take up his spoon and look into the soup, bend over it, examine it, take a spoonful and hold it to the light. "What is it? A beetle?" Grigory would ask. "A fly, perhaps," observed Marfa. The squeamish youth never answered, but he did the same with his bread, his meat, and everything he ate. He would hold a piece on his fork to the light, scrutinize it microscopically, and only after long deliberation decide to put it in his mouth. "Ach! What fine gentleman's airs!" Grigory muttered, looking at him. When Fyodor Pavlovitch heard of this development in Smerdakov he determined to make him his cook, and sent him to Moscow to be trained. He spent some years there and came back remarkably changed in appearance. He looked extraordinarily old for his age. His face had grown wrinkled, yellow, and strangely emasculate. In character he seemed almost exactly the same as before he went away. He was just as unsociable, and showed not the slightest inclination for any companionship. In Moscow, too, as we heard afterwards, he had always been silent. Moscow itself had little interest for him, he saw very little there, and took scarcely any notice of anything. He went once to the theatre, but returned silent and displeased with it. On the other hand, he came back to us from Moscow well dressed, in a clean coat and clean linen. He brushed his clothes most scrupulously twice a day invariably, and was very fond of cleaning his smart calf boots with a special English polish, so that they shone like mirrors. He turned out a first-rate cook. Fyodor Pavlovitch paid him a salary, almost the whole of which Smerdakov spent on clothes, pomade, perfumes, and such things. But he seemed to have as much contempt for the female sex as for men. He was discreet, almost unapproachable, with them. Fyodor Pavlovitch began to regard him rather differently. His fits were becoming more frequent, and on the days he was ill Martha cooked, which did not suit Fyodor Pavlovitch at all. "Why are your fits getting worse?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch, looking askance at his new cook. "Would you like to get married? Shall I find you a wife?" But Smerdakov turned pale with anger, and made no reply. Fyodor Pavlovitch left him with an impatient gesture. The great thing was that he had absolute confidence in his honesty. It happened once, when Fyodor Pavlovitch was drunk, that he dropped in the muddy courtyard 300-ruble notes which he had only just received. He only missed them next day, and was just hastening to search his pockets when he saw the notes lying on the table. Where had they come from? Smerdakov had picked them up and brought them in the day before. "Well, my lad, I've never met anyone like you," Fyodor Pavlovitch said shortly, and gave him 10 rubles. We may add that he not only believed in his honesty, but had, for some reason, a liking for him, although the young man looked as morosely at him as at everyone and was always silent. He rarely spoke. If it had occurred to anyone to wonder at the time what the young man was interested in, and what was in his mind, it would have been impossible to tell by looking at him. Yet he used sometimes to stop suddenly in the house, or even in the yard or street, and would stand still for 10 minutes, lost in thought. A physiognomist studying his face would have said that there was no thought in it, no reflection, but only a sort of contemplation. There is a remarkable picture by the painter Krumskoy, called Contemplation. There is a forest in winter, and on a roadway through the forest, in absolute solitude, stands a peasant in a torn kaftan and bark shoes. He stands, as it were, lost in thought. Yet he is not thinking, he is contemplating. If anyone touched him he would start and look at one as though awakening and bewildered. It's true he would come to himself immediately, but if he were asked what he had been thinking about, he would remember nothing. Yet probably he has, hidden within himself, the impression which had dominated him during the period of contemplation. Those impressions are dear to him and no doubt he hoards them imperceptibly, and even unconsciously. How and why, of course, he does not know either. He may suddenly, after hoarding impressions for many years, abandon everything and go off to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage for his soul's salvation, or perhaps he will suddenly set fire to his native village, and perhaps do both. There are a good many contemplatives among the peasantry. Well, Smerdakov was probably one of them, and he probably was greedily hoarding up his impressions, hardly knowing why. End of the chapter. Chapter 7. The Controversy. But Balaam's ass had suddenly spoken. The subject was a strange one. Grigory had gone in the morning to make purchases, and had heard from the shopkeeper Lukunov the story of a Russian soldier which had appeared in the newspaper of that day. This soldier had been taken prisoner in some remote part of Asia, and was threatened with an immediate agonizing death if he did not renounce Christianity and follow Islam. He refused to deny his faith, and was tortured, flayed alive, and died, praising and glorifying Christ. Grigory had related the story at table. Fyodor Pavlovitch always liked, over the dessert after dinner, to laugh and talk, if only with Grigory. This afternoon he was in a particularly good-humored and expansive mood. Sipping his brandy and listening to the story, he observed that they ought to make a saint of a soldier like that, and to take his skin to some monastery. That would make the people flock, and bring the money in. Grigory frowned, seeing that Fyodor Pavlovitch was by no means touched, but, as usual, was beginning to scoff. At that moment Smerdakov, who was standing by the door, smiled. Smerdakov often waited at table towards the end of dinner, and since Ivan's arrival in our town he had done so every day. "What are you grinning at?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch, catching the smile instantly, and knowing that it referred to Grigory. "Well, my opinion is," Smerdakov began suddenly and unexpectedly in a loud voice, "that if that laudable soldier's exploit was so very great there would have been, to my thinking, no sin in it if he had on such an emergency renounced, so to speak, the name of Christ and his own christening, to save by that same his life, for good deeds, by which, in the course of years to expiate his cowardice." "How could it not be a sin? You're talking nonsense. For that you'll go straight to hell and be roasted there like mutton," put in Fyodor Pavlovitch. It was at this point that Alyosha came in, and Fyodor Pavlovitch, as we have seen, was highly delighted at his appearance. "We're on your subject," he chuckled gleefully, making Alyosha sit down to listen. "As for mutton, that's not so, and there'll be nothing there for this, and there shouldn't be either, if it's according to justice," Smerdakov maintained stoutly. "How do you mean according to justice?" Fyodor Pavlovitch cried still more gaily, nudging Alyosha with his knee. "He's a rascal, that's what he is," burst from Grigory. He looked Smerdakov wrathfully in the face. "As for being a rascal, wait a little, Grigory Vasilevich," answered Smerdakov with perfect composure. "You'd better consider yourself that, once I am taken prisoner by the enemies of the Christian race, and they demand from me to curse the name of God and to renounce my holy christening, I am fully entitled to act by my own reason, since there would be no sin in it." "But you've said that before. Don't waste words. Prove it," cried Fyodor Pavlovitch. "Soup maker," muttered Grigory contemptuously. "As for being a soup maker, wait a bit, too, and consider for yourself, Grigory Vasilevich, without abusing me. For as soon as I say to those enemies, 'No, I'm not a Christian, and I curse my true God,' then at once, by God's high judgment, I become immediately and specially anathema accursed, and am cut off from the Holy Church, exactly as though I were a heathen, so that at that very instant, not only when I say it aloud, but when I think of saying it, before a quarter of a second has passed, I am cut off. Is that so or not, Grigory Vasilevich?" He addressed Grigory with obvious satisfaction, though he was really answering Fyodor Pavlovitch's questions, and was well aware of it, and intentionally pretending that Grigory had asked the questions. "Ivan," cried Fyodor Pavlovitch suddenly, "stoop down for me to whisper. He's got this all up for your benefit. He wants you to praise him. Praise him." Ivan listened with perfect seriousness to his father's excited whisper. "Stay, Smerdakov, be quiet a minute," cried Fyodor Pavlovitch once more. "Ivan, your ear again." Ivan bent down again with a perfectly grave face. "I love you as I do Alyosha. Don't think I don't love you. Some brandy?" "Yes. But you're rather drunk yourself," thought Ivan, looking steadily at his father. He was watching Smerdakov with great curiosity. "You're anathema accursed, as it is," Grigory suddenly burst out, "and how dare you argue, you rascal, after that, if—" "Don't scold him, Grigory, don't scold him," Fyodor Pavlovitch cut him short. "You should wait, Grigory Vasilevich, if only a short time, and listen, for I haven't finished all I had to say. For at the very moment I become accursed, at that same highest moment, I become exactly like a heathen, and my christening is taken off me and becomes of no avail. Isn't that so?" "Make haste and finish, my boy," Fyodor Pavlovitch urged him, sipping from his wine glass with relish. "And if I've ceased to be a Christian, then I told no lie to the enemy when they asked whether I was a Christian or not a Christian, seeing I had already been relieved by God himself of my Christianity by reason of the thought alone, before I had time to utter a word to the enemy. And if I have already been discharged, in what manner and with what sort of justice can I be held responsible as a Christian in the other world for having denied Christ, when, through the very thought alone, before denying him I had been relieved from my christening. If I'm no longer a Christian, then I can't renounce Christ, for I've nothing then to renounce. Who will hold an unclean Tatar responsible, Grigory Vasilevich, even in heaven, for not having been born a Christian? And who would punish him for that, considering that you can't take two skins off one ox? For God Almighty himself, even if he did make the Tatar responsible, when he dies would give him the smallest possible punishment, I imagine, since he must be punished, judging that he is not to blame if he has come into the world an unclean heathen, from heathen parents. The Lord God can't surely take a Tatar and say he was a Christian? That would mean that the Almighty would tell a real untruth. And can the Lord of heaven and earth tell a lie, even in one word? Grigory was thunderstruck and looked at the orator, his eyes nearly starting out of his head. Though he did not clearly understand what was said, he had caught something in this rigmarole, and stood, looking like a man who has just hit his head against a wall. Fyodor Pavlovitch emptied his glass and went off into his shrill laugh. Alyosha! Alyosha! What do you say to that? Ah, you casuist! He must have been with the Jesuits, somewhere, Ivan. Oh, you stinking Jesuit, who taught you? But you're talking nonsense, you casuist, nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. Don't cry, Grigory, we'll reduce him to smoke and ashes in a moment. Tell me this, oh ass, you may be right before your enemies, but you have renounced your faith all the same in your own heart, and you say yourself that in that very hour you became anathema accursed. And if once you're anathema they won't pat you on the head for it in hell. What do you say to that, my fine Jesuit? There is no doubt that I have renounced it in my own heart, but there was no special sin in that. Or if there was sin, it was the most ordinary. How's that the most ordinary? You lie, accursed one, hissed Grigory. Consider yourself, Grigory Vasilevich, Smerdakov went on, staid and unruffled, conscious of his triumph, but, as it were, generous to the vanquished foe. Consider yourself, Grigory Vasilevich, it is said in the scripture that if you have faith, even as a mustard seed, and bid a mountain move into the sea, it will move without the least delay at your bidding. Well, Grigory Vasilevich, if I'm without faith and you have so great a faith that you are continually swearing at me, you try yourself telling this mountain, not to move into the sea for that's a long way off, but even to our stinking little river which runs at the bottom of the garden. You'll see for yourself that it won't budge, but will remain just where it is however much you shout at it, and that shows, Grigory Vasilevich, that you haven't faith in the proper manner, and only abuse others about it. Again, taking into consideration that no one in our day, not only you, but actually no one, from the highest person to the lowest peasant, can shove mountains into the sea, except perhaps some one man in the world, or, at most, two, and they most likely are saving their souls in secret somewhere in the Egyptian desert, so you wouldn't find them, if so it be, if all the rest have no faith, will God curse all the rest? That is, the population of the whole earth, except about 2 hermits in the desert, and in his well-known mercy will he not forgive one of them? And so I'm persuaded that though I may once have doubted I shall be forgiven if I shed tears of repentance. Stay, cried Fyodor Pavlovitch, in a transport of delight. So you do suppose there are 2 who can move mountains? Ivan, make a note of it, write it down. There you have the Russian all over. You're quite right in saying it's characteristic of the people's faith, Ivan assented, with an approving smile. You agree? Then it must be so, if you agree. It's true, isn't it, Alyosha? That's the Russian faith all over, isn't it? No, Smerdakov has not the Russian faith at all, said Alyosha firmly and gravely. I'm not talking about his faith. I mean those 2 in the desert, only that idea. Surely that's Russian, isn't it? Yes, that's purely Russian, said Alyosha smiling. Your words are worth a gold piece, oh ass, and I'll give it to you today. But as to the rest you talk nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. Let me tell you, stupid, that we here are all of little faith, only from carelessness, because we haven't time, things are too much for us. And, in the second place, The Lord God has given us so little time, only 24 hours in the day. So that one hasn't even time to get sleep enough, much less to repent of one's sins. While you have denied your faith to your enemies when you've nothing else to think about but to show your faith. So I consider, brother, that it constitutes a sin. Constitute a sin it may, but consider yourself, Grigory Vasilevich, that it only extenuates it, if it does constitute. If I had believed then in very truth, as I ought to have believed, then it really would have been sinful if I had not faced tortures for my faith, and had gone over to the pagan Mohammedan faith. But, of course, it wouldn't have come to torture then, because I should only have had to say at that instant to the mountain, move and crush the tormentor, and it would have moved and at the very instant have crushed him like a black beetle. And I should have walked away as though nothing had happened, praising and glorifying God. But, suppose at that very moment I had tried all that, and cried to that mountain, crush these tormentors, and it hadn't crushed them, how could I have helped doubting, pray, at such a time? And at such a dread hour of mortal terror? And apart from that, I should know already that I could not attain to the fullness of the kingdom of heaven. For since the mountain had not moved at my word, they could not think very much of my faith up aloft, and there could be no very great reward awaiting me in the world to come. So why should I let them flay the skin off me as well, and to no good purpose? For, even though they had flayed my skin half off my back, even then the mountain would not have moved at my word or at my cry. And at such a moment not only doubt might come over one but one might lose one's reason from fear. So that one would not be able to think at all. And, therefore, how should I be particularly to blame if not seeing my advantage or reward there or here, I should, at least, save my skin. And so trusting fully in the grace of the Lord I should cherish the hope that I might be altogether forgiven. End of the chapter. Chapter 8. Over the brandy. The controversy was over. But, strange to say, Fyodor Pavlovich, who had been so gay, suddenly began frowning. He frowned and gulped brandy, and it was already a glass too much. Get along with you, Jesuits, he cried to the servants. Go away, Smerdakov. I'll send you the gold piece I promised you today, but be off. Don't cry, Grigory. Go to Marfa. She'll comfort you and put you to bed. The rascals won't let us sit in peace after dinner, he snapped peevishly, as the servants promptly withdrew at his word. Smerdakov always pokes himself in now, after dinner. It's you he's so interested in. What have you done to fascinate him? He added to Ivan. Nothing whatever, answered Ivan. He's pleased to have a high opinion of me, he's a lackey and a mean soul. Raw material for revolution, however, when the time comes. For revolution? There will be others and better ones. But there will be some like him as well. His kind will come first, and better ones after. And when will the time come? The rocket will go off and fizzle out, perhaps. The peasants are not very fond of listening to these soup makers, so far. Ah, brother, but a Balaam's ass like that thinks and thinks, and the devil knows where he gets to. He's storing up ideas, said Ivan, smiling. You see, I know he can't bear me, nor anyone else, even you, though you fancy that he has a high opinion of you. Worse still with Alyosha, he despises Alyosha. But he doesn't steal, that's one thing, and he's not a gossip, he holds his tongue, and doesn't wash our dirty linen in public. He makes capital fish pasties too. But, damn him, is he worth talking about so much? Of course he isn't. And as for the ideas he may be hatching, the Russian peasant, generally speaking, needs thrashing. That I've always maintained. Our peasants are swindlers, and don't deserve to be pitied, and it's a good thing they're still flogged sometimes. Russia is rich in birches. If they destroyed the forests, it would be the ruin of Russia. I stand up for the clever people. We've left off thrashing the peasants, we've grown so clever. But they go on thrashing themselves. And a good thing too. For with what measure ye mete it shall be measured to you again, or how does it go? Anyhow, it will be measured. But Russia's all swinishness. My dear, if you only knew how I hate Russia. That is, not Russia, but all this vice. But maybe I mean Russia. Tout cela c'est de la coquonnerie. Do you know what I like? I like wit. You've had another glass. That's enough. Wait a bit. I'll have one more, and then another, and then I'll stop. No, stay, you interrupted me. At Mokre I was talking to an old man, and he told me, there's nothing we like so much as sentencing girls to be thrashed, and we always give the lads the job of thrashing them. And the girl he has thrashed today, the young man will ask in marriage tomorrow. So it quite suits the girls, too, he said. There's a set of dosades for you. But it's clever, anyway. Shall we go over and have a look at it, eh? Alyosha, are you blushing? Don't be bashful, child. I'm sorry I didn't stay to dinner at the superior's and tell the monks about the girls at Mokre. Alyosha, don't be angry that I offended your superior this morning. I lost my temper. If there is a God, if he exists, then, of course, I'm to blame, and I shall have to answer for it. But if there isn't a God at all, what do they deserve, your fathers? It's not enough to cut their heads off, for they keep back progress. Would you believe it, Ivan, that lacerates my sentiments? No, you don't believe it as I see from your eyes. You believe what people say, that I'm nothing but a buffoon. Alyosha, do you believe that I'm nothing but a buffoon? No, I don't believe it. And I believe you don't, and that you speak the truth. You look sincere and you speak sincerely. But not Ivan. Ivan's supercilious. I'd make an end of your monks, though, all the same. I'd take all that mystic stuff and suppress it, once for all over Russia, so as to bring all the fools to reason. And the gold and the silver that would flow into the mint. But why suppress it? Asked Ivan. That truth may prevail. That's why. Well, if truth were to prevail, you know, you'd be the first to be robbed and suppressed. Ah. I dare say you're right. Ah, I'm an ass. Burst out Fyodor Pavlovitch, striking himself lightly on the forehead. Well, your monastery may stand then, Alyosha, if that's how it is. And we clever people will sit snug and enjoy our brandy. You know, Ivan, it must have been so ordained by the Almighty himself. Ivan, speak, is there a God or not? Stay, speak the truth, speak seriously. Why are you laughing again? I'm laughing that you should have made a clever remark just now about Smerdakov's belief in the existence of two saints who could move mountains. Why, am I like him now, then? Very much. Well, that shows I'm a Russian, too, and I have a Russian characteristic. And you may be caught in the same way, though you are a philosopher. Shall I catch you? What do you bet that I'll catch you tomorrow? Speak, all the same, is there a God, or not? Only, be serious. I want you to be serious now. No, there is no God. Alyosha, is there a God? There is. Ivan, and is there immortality of some sort, just a little, just a tiny bit? There is no immortality either. None at all? None at all. There's absolute nothingness then. Perhaps there is just something? Anything is better than nothing. Absolute nothingness. Alyosha, is there immortality? There is. God and immortality? God and immortality. In God is immortality. It's more likely Ivan's right. Good Lord. To think what faith, what force of all kinds. Man has lavished for nothing, on that dream, and for how many thousand years? Who is it laughing at, man? Ivan. For the last time, once for all, is there a God or not? I ask for the last time. And for the last time there is not. Who is laughing at mankind, Ivan? It must be the devil, said Ivan, smiling. And the devil? Does he exist? No, there's no devil either. It's a pity. Damn it all, what wouldn't I do to the man who first invented God? Hanging on a bitter aspen tree would be too good for him. There would have been no civilization if they hadn't invented God. Wouldn't there have been? Without God? No. And there would have been no brandy either. But I must take your brandy away from you, anyway. Stop, 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 dear boy, one more little glass. I've hurt Alyosha's feelings. You're not angry with me, Alyosha? My dear little Alexei. No, I am not angry. I know your thoughts. Your heart is better than your head. My heart better than my head, is it? Oh, Lord. And that from you. Ivan, do you love Alyosha? Yes. You must love him. Fyodor Pavlovitch was by this time very drunk. Listen, Alyosha, I was rude to your elder this morning. But I was excited. But there's wit in that elder, don't you think, Ivan? Very likely. There is. Il y du peron lardons. He's a Jesuit, a Russian one, that is. As he's an honorable person, there's a hidden indignation boiling within him at having to pretend and affect holiness. But, of course, he believes in God. Not a bit of it. Didn't you know? Why, he tells everyone so, himself. That is, not everyone, but all the clever people who come to him. He said straight out to Governor Schultz not long ago, credo, but I don't know in what. Really? He really did. But I respect him. There's something of Mephistopheles about him, or rather of the hero of our time, Arbanine, or what's his name. You see, he's a sensualist. He's such a sensualist that I should be afraid for my daughter or my wife if she went to confess to him. You know, when he begins telling stories. The year before last he invited us to tea with liqueur. The ladies sent him liqueur, and began telling us about old times till we nearly split our sides. Especially how he once cured a paralyzed woman. If my legs were not bad, I know a dance I could dance you, he said. What do you say to that? I've plenty of tricks in my time, said he. He did Dernadoff, the merchant, out of 60,000. What, he stole it? He brought him the money as a man he could trust, saying, take care of it for me, friend, there'll be a police search at my place tomorrow. And he kept it. You have given it to the church, he declared. I said to him, you are a scoundrel, I said. No, said he, I'm not a scoundrel, but I'm broad-minded. But that wasn't he, that was someone else. I've muddled him with someone else, without noticing it. Come, another glass and that's enough. Take away the bottle, Ivan. I've been telling lies. Why didn't you stop me, Ivan, and tell me I was lying? I knew you'd stop of yourself. That's a lie. You did it from spite, from simple spite against me. You despise me. You have come to me and despised me in my own house. Well, I'm going away. You've had too much brandy. I've begged you for Christ's sake to go to Chermoshnia for a day or two, and you don't go. I'll go tomorrow if you're so set upon it. You won't go. You want to keep an eye on me. That's what you want, spiteful fellow. That's why you won't go. The old man persisted. He had reached that state of drunkenness when the drunkard who has till then been inoffensive tries to pick a quarrel and to assert himself. Why are you looking at me? Why do you look like that? Your eyes look at me and say, you ugly drunkard. Your eyes are mistrustful. They're contemptuous. You've come here with some design. Alyosha, here, looks at me and his eyes shine. Alyosha doesn't despise me. Alexei, you mustn't love Ivan. Don't be ill-tempered with my brother. Leave off attacking him, Alyosha said emphatically. Oh, all right. Ugh, my head aches. Take away the brandy, Ivan. It's the third time I've told you. He mused, and suddenly a slow, cunning grin spread over his face. Don't be angry with a feeble old man, Ivan. I know you don't love me, but don't be angry all the same. You've nothing to love me for. You go to Chermoshnia. I'll come to you myself and bring you a present. I'll show you a little wench there. I've had my eye on her a long time. She's still running about barefoot. Don't be afraid of barefooted wenches, don't despise them, they're pearls. And he kissed his hand with a smack. To my thinking, he revived at once, seeming to grow sober the instant he touched on his favorite topic. To my thinking, you boys. You children, little sucking pigs. To my thinking, I never thought a woman ugly in my life, that's been my rule. Can you understand that? How could you understand it? You've milk in your veins, not blood. You're not out of your shells yet. My rule has been that you can always find something devilishly interesting in every woman that you wouldn't find in any other. Only, one must know how to find it, that's the point. That's a talent. To my mind there are no ugly women. The very fact that she is a woman is half the battle, but how could you understand that? Even in the AFI, even in them you may discover something that makes you simply wonder that men have been such fools as to let them grow old without noticing them. Barefooted girls or unattractive ones, you must take by surprise. Didn't you know that? You must astound them till they're fascinated, upset, ashamed that such a gentleman should fall in love with such a little slut. It's a jolly good thing that there always are and will be masters and slaves in the world, so there always will be a little maid of all work and her master, and you know, that's all that's needed for happiness. Stay, listen, Alyosha, I always used to surprise your mother, but in a different way. I paid no attention to her at all, but all at once, when the minute came, I'd be all devotion to her, crawl on my knees, kiss her feet, and I always, I remember it as though it were today, reduced her to that tinkling, quiet, nervous, queer little laugh. It was peculiar to her. I knew her attacks always used to begin like that. The next day she would begin shrieking hysterically, and this little laugh was not a sign of delight, though it made a very good counterfeit. That's the great thing, to know how to take every one. Once Belayevsky, he was a handsome fellow, and rich, used to like to come here and hang about her, suddenly gave me a slap in the face in her presence. And she, such a mild cheap, why, I thought she would have knocked me down for that blow. How she set on me. You are beaten now, she said. You've taken a blow from him. You have been trying to sell me to him, she said. And how dared he strike you in my presence? Don't dare come near me again, never, never. Run at once, challenge him to a duel. I took her to the monastery then to bring her to her senses. The Holy Fathers prayed her back to reason. But I swear, by God, Alyosha, I never insulted the poor crazy girl. Only once, perhaps, in the first year, then she was very fond of praying. She used to keep the feasts of Our Lady particularly and used to turn me out of her room then. I'll knock that mysticism out of her, thought I. Here, said I, you see your holy image. Here it is. Here I take it down. You believe it's miraculous, but here, I'll spit on it directly and nothing will happen to me for it. When she saw it, good Lord, I thought she would kill me. But she only jumped up, wrung her hands, then suddenly hid her face in them, began trembling all over and fell on the floor, fell all of a heap. Alyosha, Alyosha, what's the matter? The old man jumped up in alarm. From the time he had begun speaking about his mother, a change had gradually come over Alyosha's face. He flushed crimson, his eyes glowed, his lips quivered. The old sot had gone spluttering on, noticing nothing, till the moment when something very strange happened to Alyosha. Precisely what he was describing in The Crazy Woman was suddenly repeated with Alyosha. He jumped up from his seat exactly as his mother was said to have done, wrung his hands, hid his face in them, and fell back in his chair, shaking all over in an hysterical paroxysm of sudden violent, silent weeping. His extraordinary resemblance to his mother particularly impressed the old man. Ivan, water, quickly. It's like her, exactly as she used to be then, his mother. Spurt some water on him from your mouth, that's what I used to do to her. He's upset about his mother, he muttered to Ivan. But she was my mother, too, I believe, his mother. Was she not? Said Ivan, with uncontrolled anger and contempt. The old man shrank before his flashing eyes. But something very strange had happened, though only for a second. It seemed really to have escaped the old man's mind that Alyosha's mother actually was the mother of Ivan too. Your mother? He muttered, not understanding. What do you mean? What mother are you talking about? Was she? Why, damn it. Of course she was yours too. Damn it. My mind has never been so darkened before. Excuse me, why, I was thinking, Ivan. He stopped. A broad, drunken, half-senseless grin overspread his face. At that moment a fearful noise and clamor was heard in the hall, there were violent shouts, the door was flung open, and Dmitri burst into the room. The old man rushed to Ivan in terror. "He'll kill me. He'll kill me. Don't let him get at me," he screamed, clinging to the skirt of Ivan's coat. End of the chapter. Chapter 9. The Sensualists. Grigory and Smerdakov ran into the room after Dmitri. They had been struggling with him in the passage, refusing to admit him, acting on instructions given them by Fyodor Pavlovich some days before. Taking advantage of the fact that Dmitri stopped a moment on entering the room to look about him, Grigory ran round the table, closed the double doors on the opposite side of the room leading to the inner apartments, and stood before the closed doors, stretching wide his arms, prepared to defend the entrance, so to speak, with the last drop of his blood. Seeing this, Dmitri uttered a scream rather than a shout and rushed at Grigory. "Then she's there. She's hidden there. Out of the way, scoundrel." He tried to pull Grigory away, but the old servant pushed him back. Beside himself with fury, Dmitri struck out, and hit Grigory with all his might. The old man fell like a log, and Dmitri, leaping over him, broke in the door. Smerdakov remained pale and trembling at the other end of the room, huddling close to Fyodor Pavlovich. "She's here," shouted Dmitri. "I saw her turn towards the house just now, but I couldn't catch her. Where is she? Where is she?" That shout, "She's here," produced an indescribable effect on Fyodor Pavlovich. All his terror left him. "Hold him! Hold him!" he cried, and dashed after Dmitri. Meanwhile Grigory had got up from the floor, but still seemed stunned. Ivan and Alyosha ran after their father. In the third room something was heard to fall on the floor with a ringing crash. It was a large glass vase, not an expensive one, on a marble pedestal which Dmitri had upset as he ran past it. "At him!" shouted the old man. "Help!" Ivan and Alyosha caught the old man and were forcibly bringing him back. "Why do you run after him? He'll murder you outright," Ivan cried wrathfully at his father. "Ivan! Alyosha! She must be here. Grushenka's here." He said he saw her himself, running. He was choking. He was not expecting Grushenka at the time, and the sudden news that she was here made him beside himself. He was trembling all over. He seemed frantic. "But you've seen for yourself that she hasn't come," cried Ivan. "But she may have come by that other entrance. You know that entrance is locked, and you have the key." Dmitri suddenly reappeared in the drawing room. He had, of course, found the other entrance locked, and the key actually was in Fyodor Pavlovich's pocket. The windows of all the rooms were also closed, so Grushenka could not have come in anywhere nor have run out anywhere. "Hold him!" shrieked Fyodor Pavlovich, as soon as he saw him again. "He's been stealing money in my bedroom." And tearing himself from Ivan he rushed again at Dmitri. But Dmitri threw up both hands and suddenly clutched the old man by the two tufts of hair that remained on his temples, tugged at them, and flung him with a crash on the floor. He kicked him 2 or 3 times with his heel in the face. The old man moaned shrilly. Ivan, though not so strong as Dmitri, threw his arms round him, and with all his might pulled him away. Alyosha helped him with his slender strength, holding Dmitri in front. "Madman! You've killed him," cried Ivan. "Serve him right," shouted Dmitri breathlessly. "If I haven't killed him, I'll come again and kill him. You can't protect him." "Dmitri! Go away at once," cried Alyosha commandingly. "Alexei! You tell me. It's only you I can believe. Was she here just now, or not? I saw her myself creeping this way by the fence from the lane. I shouted, she ran away. I swear she's not been here, and no one expected her. But I saw her. So she must. I'll find out at once where she is. Goodbye, Alexei. Not a word to Aesop about the money now. But go to Katerina Ivanovna at once and be sure to say, he sends his compliments to you. Compliments, his compliments. Just compliments and farewell. Describe the scene to her. Meanwhile Ivan and Grigory had raised the old man and seated him in an armchair. His face was covered with blood, but he was conscious and listened greedily to Dmitri's cries. He was still fancying that Grushenka really was somewhere in the house. Dmitri looked at him with hatred as he went out. I don't repent shedding your blood, he cried. Beware, old man, beware of your dream, for I have my dream, too. I curse you, and disown you altogether. He ran out of the room. She's here. She must be here. Smerdakov. Smerdakov. The old man wheezed, scarcely audibly, beckoning to him with his finger. No, she's not here, you old lunatic, Ivan shouted at him angrily. Here, he's fainting. Water. A towel. Make haste, Smerdakov. Smerdakov ran for water. At last they got the old man undressed, and put him to bed. They wrapped a wet towel round his head. Exhausted by the brandy, by his violent emotion, and the blows he had received, he shut his eyes and fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. Ivan and Alyosha went back to the drawing room. Smerdakov removed the fragments of the broken vase, while Grigory stood by the table looking gloomily at the floor. Shouldn't you put a wet bandage on your head and go to bed, too? Alyosha said to him. We'll look after him. My brother gave you a terrible blow, on the head. He's insulted me. Grigory articulated gloomily and distinctly. He's insulted his father, not only you, observed Ivan with a forced smile. I used to wash him in his tub. He's insulted me, repeated Grigory. Damn it all, if I hadn't pulled him away perhaps he'd have murdered him. It wouldn't take much to do for Aesop, would it? Whispered Ivan to Alyosha. God forbid, cried Alyosha. Why should he forbid? Ivan went on in the same whisper, with a malignant grimace. One reptile will devour the other. And serve them both right, too. Alyosha shuddered. Of course I won't let him be murdered as I didn't just now. Stay here, Alyosha, I'll go for a turn in the yard. My head's begun to ache. Alyosha went to his father's bedroom and sat by his bedside behind the screen for about an hour. The old man suddenly opened his eyes and gazed for a long while at Alyosha, evidently remembering and meditating. All at once his face betrayed extraordinary excitement. Alyosha, he whispered apprehensively, where's Ivan? In the yard. He's got a headache. He's on the watch. Give me that looking glass. It stands over there. Give it me. Alyosha gave him a little round folding looking glass which stood on the chest of drawers. The old man looked at himself in it. His nose was considerably swollen, and on the left side of his forehead there was a rather large crimson bruise. What does Ivan say? Alyosha, my dear, my only son, I'm afraid of Ivan. I'm more afraid of Ivan than the other. You're the only one I'm not afraid of. Don't be afraid of Ivan either. He is angry, but he'll defend you. Alyosha, and what of the other? He's run to Grushenka. My angel, tell me the truth, was she here just now or not? No one has seen her. It was a mistake. She has not been here. You know Mitya wants to marry her, She won't marry him. She won't. She won't. She won't. She won't on any account. The old man fairly fluttered with joy, as though nothing more comforting could have been said to him. In his delight he seized Alyosha's hand and pressed it warmly to his heart. Tears positively glittered in his eyes. That image of the Mother of God of which I was telling you just now, he said. Take it home and keep it for yourself. And I'll let you go back to the monastery. I was joking this morning, don't be angry with me. My head aches, Alyosha. Alyosha, comfort my heart. Be an angel and tell me the truth. You're still asking whether she has been here or not? Alyosha said sorrowfully. No, no, no. I believe you. I'll tell you what it is, you go to Grushenka yourself, or see her somehow, make haste and ask her, see for yourself, which she means to choose, him or me. Eh? What? Can you? If I see her I'll ask her, Alyosha muttered, embarrassed. No, she won't tell you, the old man interrupted, she's a rogue. She'll begin kissing you and say that it's you she wants. She's a deceitful, shameless hussy. You mustn't go to her, you mustn't. No, father, and it wouldn't be suitable, it wouldn't be right at all. Where was he sending you just now? He shouted go as he ran away. To Katerina Ivanovna. For money? To ask her for money? No. Not for money. He's no money, not a farthing. I'll settle down for the night, and think things over, and you can go. Perhaps you'll meet her. Only be sure to come to me tomorrow in the morning. Be sure to. I have a word to say to you tomorrow. Will you come? Yes. When you come, pretend you've come of your own accord to ask after me. Don't tell anyone I told you to. Don't say a word to Ivan. Very well. Goodbye, my angel. You stood up for me, just now. I shall never forget it. I've a word to say to you tomorrow, but I must think about it. And how do you feel now? I shall get up tomorrow and go out, perfectly well, perfectly well. Crossing the yard, Alyosha found Ivan sitting on the bench at the gateway. He was sitting writing something in pencil in his notebook. Alyosha told Ivan that their father had waked up, was conscious, and had let him go back to sleep at the monastery. Alyosha, I should be very glad to meet you tomorrow morning, said Ivan cordially, standing up. His cordiality was a complete surprise to Alyosha. I shall be at the Holocaust tomorrow, answered Alyosha. I may be at Katerina Ivanovna's, too, if I don't find her now. But you're going to her now, anyway? For that compliments and farewell, said Ivan smiling. Alyosha was disconcerted. I think I quite understand his exclamations just now, and part of what went before. Dmitri has asked you to go to her and say that he, well, in fact, takes his leave of her? Brother, how will all this horror end between father and Dmitri? Exclaimed Alyosha. One can't tell for certain. Perhaps in nothing, it may all fizzle out. That woman is a beast. In any case we must keep the old man indoors and not let Dmitri in the house. Brother, let me ask one thing more, has any man a right to look at other men and decide which is worthy to live? Why bring in the question of worth? The matter is most often decided in men's hearts on other grounds much more natural. And as for rights, who has not the right to wish? Not for another man's death? What even if for another man's death? Why lie to oneself, since all men live so and perhaps cannot help living so? Are you referring to what I said just now, that one reptile will devour the other? In that case let me ask you, do you think me like Dmitri capable of shedding Aesop's blood, murdering him, eh? What are you saying, Ivan? Such an idea never crossed my mind. I don't think Dmitri is capable of it, either. Thanks, if only for that, smiled Ivan. Be sure, I should always defend him. But in my wishes I reserve myself full latitude in this case. Goodbye till tomorrow. Don't condemn me, and don't look on me as a villain, he added with a smile. They shook hands warmly as they had never done before. Alyosha felt that his brother had taken the first step towards him, and that he had certainly done this with some definite motive. End of the chapter. Chapter 10. Both together. Alyosha left his father's house feeling even more exhausted and dejected in spirit than when he had entered it. His mind too seemed shattered and unhinged, while he felt that he was afraid to put together the disjointed fragments and form a general idea from all the agonizing and conflicting experiences of the day. He felt something bordering upon despair, which he had never known till then. Towering like a mountain above all the rest stood the fatal, insoluble question: how would things end between his father and his brother Dmitri with this terrible woman? Now he had himself been a witness of it, he had been present and seen them face to face. Yet only his brother Dmitri could be made unhappy, terribly, completely unhappy. There was trouble awaiting him. It appeared too that there were other people concerned, far more so than Alyosha could have supposed before. There was something positively mysterious in it, too. Ivan had made a step towards him, which was what Alyosha had been long desiring. Yet now he felt for some reason that he was frightened at it. And these women? Strange to say, that morning he had set out for Katerina Ivanovna's in the greatest embarrassment, now he felt nothing of the kind. On the contrary, he was hastening there as though expecting to find guidance from her. Yet to give her this message was obviously more difficult than before. The matter of the 3,000 was decided irrevocably. And Dmitri, feeling himself dishonored and losing his last hope, might sink to any depth. He had, moreover, told him to describe to Katerina Ivanovna the scene which had just taken place with his father. It was by now 7 o'clock, and it was getting dark as Alyosha entered the very spacious and convenient house in the high street occupied by Katerina Ivanovna. Alyosha knew that she lived with 2 aunts. One of them, a woman of little education, was that aunt of her half-sister Agofia Ivanovna who had looked after her in her father's house when she came from boarding school. The other aunt was a Moscow lady of style and consequence, though in straitened circumstances. It was said that they both gave way in everything to Katerina Ivanovna, and that she only kept them with her as chaperones. Katerina Ivanovna herself gave way to no one but her benefactress, the general's widow, who had been kept by illness in Moscow, and to whom she was obliged to write twice a week a full account of all her doings. When Alyosha entered the hall and asked the maid who opened the door to him to take his name up, it was evident that they were already aware of his arrival. Possibly he had been noticed from the window. At least, Alyosha heard a noise, caught the sound of flying footsteps and rustling skirts. 2 or 3 women, perhaps, had run out of the room. Alyosha thought it strange that his arrival should cause such excitement. He was conducted however to the drawing room at once. It was a large room, elegantly and amply furnished, not at all in provincial style. There were many sofas, lounges, settees, big and little tables. There were pictures on the walls, vases and lamps on the tables, masses of flowers, and even an aquarium in the window. It was twilight and rather dark. Alyosha made out a silk mantle thrown down on the sofa, where people had evidently just been sitting, and on a table in front of the sofa were 2 unfinished cups of chocolate, cakes, a glass saucer with blue raisins, and another with sweetmeats. Alyosha saw that he had interrupted visitors, and frowned. But at that instant the portiere was raised, and with rapid, hurrying footsteps Katerina Ivanovna came in, holding out both hands to Alyosha with a radiant smile of delight. At the same instant a servant brought in 2 lighted candles and set them on the table. "Thank God. At last you have come too. I've been simply praying for you all day. Sit down." Alyosha had been struck by Katerina Ivanovna's beauty when, 3 weeks before, Dmitri had first brought him, at Katerina Ivanovna's special request, to be introduced to her. There had been no conversation between them at that interview, however. Supposing Alyosha to be very shy, Katerina Ivanovna had talked all the time to Dmitri to spare him. Alyosha had been silent, but he had seen a great deal very clearly. He was struck by the imperiousness, proud ease, and self-confidence of the haughty girl. And all that was certain, Alyosha felt that he was not exaggerating it. He thought her great glowing black eyes were very fine, especially with her pale, even rather sallow, longish face. But in those eyes and in the lines of her exquisite lips there was something with which his brother might well be passionately in love, but which perhaps could not be loved for long. He expressed this thought almost plainly to Dmitri when, after the visit, his brother besought and insisted that he should not conceal his impressions on seeing his betrothed. "You'll be happy with her, but perhaps, not tranquilly happy." "Quite so, brother. Such people remain always the same. They don't yield to fate. So you think I shan't love her forever?" "No, perhaps you will love her forever. But perhaps you won't always be happy with her." Alyosha had given his opinion at the time, blushing, and angry with himself for having yielded to his brother's entreaties and put such foolish ideas into words. for his opinion had struck him as awfully foolish immediately after he had uttered it. He felt ashamed too of having given so confident an opinion about a woman. It was with the more amazement that he felt now, at the first glance at Katerina Ivanovna as she ran into him, that he had perhaps been utterly mistaken. This time her face was beaming with spontaneous good-natured kindliness, and direct warm-hearted sincerity. The pride and haughtiness, which had struck Alyosha so much before, was only betrayed now in a frank, generous energy and a sort of bright, strong faith in herself. Alyosha realized at the first glance, at the first word, that all the tragedy of her position in relation to the man she loved so dearly was no secret to her, that she perhaps already knew everything, positively everything. And yet, in spite of that, there was such brightness in her face, such faith in the future. Alyosha felt at once that he had gravely wronged her in his thoughts. He was conquered and captivated immediately. Besides all this, he noticed at her first words that she was in great excitement, an excitement perhaps quite exceptional and almost approaching ecstasy. "I was so eager to see you, because I can learn from you the whole truth, from you and no one else." "I have come," muttered Alyosha confusedly. He sent me." "Ah, he sent you. I foresaw that. Now I know everything, everything," cried Katerina Ivanovna, her eyes flashing. "Wait a moment, Alexey Fyodorovitch, I'll tell you why I've been so longing to see you. You see, I know perhaps far more than you do yourself, and there's no need for you to tell me anything. I'll tell you what I want from you. I want to know your own last impression of him. I want you to tell me most directly, plainly, coarsely even, oh, as coarsely as you like, what you thought of him just now and of his position after your meeting with him today. That will perhaps be better than if I had a personal explanation with him, as he does not want to come to me. Do you understand what I want from you? Now, tell me simply, tell me every word of the message he sent you with. I knew he would send you. He told me to give you his compliments, and to say that he would never come again, but to give you his compliments." "His compliments? Was that what he said, his own expression?" "Yes. Accidentally perhaps he made a mistake in the word, perhaps he did not use the right word. No, he told me precisely to repeat that word. He begged me 2 or 3 times not to forget to say so." Katerina Ivanovna flushed hotly. "Help me now, Alexey Fyodorovitch. Now I really need your help. I'll tell you what I think, and you must simply say whether it's right or not. Listen. If he had sent me his compliments in passing, without insisting on your repeating the words, without emphasizing them, that would be the end of everything. But if he particularly insisted on those words, if he particularly told you not to forget to repeat them to me, then perhaps he was in excitement, beside himself. He had made his decision and was frightened at it. He wasn't walking away from me with a resolute step, but leaping headlong. The emphasis on that phrase may have been simply bravado." "Yes, yes," cried Alyosha warmly. "I believe that is it. And, if so, he's not altogether lost. I can still save him. Stay. Did he not tell you anything about money, about 3,000 rubles? He did speak about it, and it's that more than anything that's crushing him. He said he had lost his honor and that nothing matters now," Alyosha answered warmly, feeling a rush of hope in his heart and believing that there really might be a way of escape and salvation for his brother. "But do you know about the money?" he added, and suddenly broke off. "I've known of it a long time. I telegraphed to Moscow to inquire, and heard long ago that the money had not arrived. He hadn't sent the money, but I said nothing. Last week I learned that he was still in need of money. My only object in all this was that he should know to whom to turn, and who was his true friend. No, he won't recognize that I am his truest friend, he won't know me, and looks on me merely as a woman. I've been tormented all the week, trying to think how to prevent him from being ashamed to face me because he spent that 3,000. Let him feel ashamed of himself, let him be ashamed of other people's knowing, but not of my knowing. He can tell God everything without shame. Why is it he still does not understand how much I am ready to bear for his sake? Why doesn't he know me? How dare he not know me after all that has happened? I want to save him forever. Let him forget me as his betrothed. And here he fears that he is dishonored in my eyes. Why, he wasn't afraid to be open with you, Alexei Fyodorovitch. How is it that I don't deserve the same?" The last words she uttered in tears. Tears gushed from her eyes. "I must tell you," Alyosha began, his voice trembling too, "what happened just now between him and my father." And he described the whole scene, how Dmitri had sent him to get the money, how he had broken in, knocked his father down, and after that had again specially and emphatically begged him to take his compliments and farewell. "He went to that woman," Alyosha added softly. "And do you suppose that I can't put up with that woman? Does he think I can't? But he won't marry her," she suddenly laughed nervously. "Could such a passion last forever in a Karamazov? It's passion, not love. He won't marry her because she won't marry him." Again Katerina Ivanovna laughed strangely. "He may marry her," said Alyosha mournfully, looking down. "He won't marry her, I tell you. That girl is an angel. Do you know that? Do you know that?" Katerina Ivanovna exclaimed suddenly with extraordinary warmth. "She is one of the most fantastic of fantastic creatures. I know how bewitching she is, but I know too that she is kind, firm and noble. Why do you look at me like that, Alexei Fyodorovitch? Perhaps you are wondering at my words. Perhaps you don't believe me? Agofia Alexandrovna, my angel," she cried suddenly to someone, peeping into the next room, "come into us. This is a friend. This is Alyosha. He knows all about our affairs. Show yourself to him." "I've only been waiting behind the curtain for you to call me," said a soft, one might even say sugary, feminine voice. The portiere was raised and Grushenka herself, smiling and beaming, came up to the table. A violent revulsion passed over Alyosha. He fixed his eyes on her and could not take them off. Here she was, that awful woman, the beast, as Ivan had called her half an hour before. And yet one would have thought the creature standing before him most simple and ordinary, a good-natured, kind woman, handsome certainly, but so like other handsome ordinary women. It is true she was very, very good-looking with that Russian beauty so passionately loved by many men. She was a rather tall woman, though a little shorter than Katerina Ivanovna, who was exceptionally tall. She had a full figure, with soft, as it were, noiseless, movements, softened to a peculiar over-sweetness, like her voice. She moved, not like Katerina Ivanovna, with a vigorous, bold step, but noiselessly. Her feet made absolutely no sound on the floor. She sank softly into a low chair, softly rustling her sumptuous black silk dress, and delicately nestling her milk-white neck and broad shoulders in a costly cashmere shawl. She was 22 years old, and her face looked exactly that age. She was very white in the face, with a pale pink tint on her cheeks. The modeling of her face might be said to be too broad, and the lower jaw was set a trifle forward. Her upper lip was thin, but the slightly prominent lower lip was at least twice as full, and looked pouting. But her magnificent, abundant dark brown hair, her sable-colored eyebrows and charming grey-blue eyes with their long lashes would have made the most indifferent person, meeting her casually in a crowd in the street, stop at the sight of her face and remember it long after. What struck Alyosha most in that face was its expression of childlike good nature. There was a childlike look in her eyes, a look of childish delight. She came up to the table, beaming with delight and seeming to expect something with childish, impatient, and confiding curiosity. The light in her eyes gladdened the soul. Alyosha felt that. There was something else in her which he could not understand, or would not have been able to define, and which yet perhaps unconsciously affected him. It was that softness, that voluptuousness of her bodily movements, that cat-like noiselessness. Yet it was a vigorous, ample body. Under the shawl could be seen full broad shoulders, a high, still quite girlish bosom. Her figure suggested the lines of the Venus of Milo, though already in somewhat exaggerated proportions. That could be divined. Connoisseurs of Russian beauty could have foretold with certainty that this fresh, still youthful beauty would lose its harmony by the age of 30, would spread, that the face would become puffy, and that wrinkles would very soon appear upon her forehead and round the eyes, the complexion would grow coarse and red perhaps, in fact, that it was the beauty of the moment, the fleeting beauty which is so often met with in Russian women. Alyosha, of course, did not think of this, but though he was fascinated, yet he wondered with an unpleasant sensation, and as it were regretfully, why she drawled in that way and could not speak naturally. She did so evidently feeling there was a charm in the exaggerated, honeyed modulation of the syllables. It was, of course, only a bad, underbred habit that showed bad education and a false idea of good manners. And yet this intonation and manner of speaking impressed Alyosha as almost incredibly incongruous with the childishly simple and happy expression of her face, the soft, babyish joy in her eyes. Katerina Ivanovna at once made her sit down in an armchair facing Alyosha, and ecstatically kissed her several times on her smiling lips. She seemed quite in love with her. "This is the first time we've met, Alexey Fyodorovitch," she said rapturously. "I wanted to know her, to see her. I wanted to go to her, but I'd no sooner expressed the wish than she came to me. I knew we should settle everything together, everything. My heart told me so. I was begged not to take the step, but I foresaw it would be a way out of the difficulty, and I was not mistaken. Grushenka has explained everything to me, told me all she means to do. She flew here like an angel of goodness and brought us peace and joy." "You did not disdain me, sweet, excellent young lady," drawled Grushenka in her sing-song voice, still with the same charming smile of delight. "Don't dare to speak to me like that, you sorceress, you witch. Disdain you. Here, I must kiss your lower lip once more. It looks as though it were swollen, and now it will be more so, and more and more. Look how she laughs, Alexey Fyodorovitch. It does one's heart good to see the angel." Alyosha flushed, and faint, imperceptible shivers kept running down him. "You make so much of me, dear young lady, and perhaps I am not at all worthy of your kindness." "Not worthy? She's not worthy of it," Katerina Ivanovna cried again with the same warmth. "You know, Alexey Fyodorovitch, we're fanciful, we're self-willed, but proudest of the proud in our little heart. We're noble, we're generous, Alexey Fyodorovitch, let me tell you. We have only been unfortunate. We were too ready to make every sacrifice for an unworthy, perhaps, or fickle man. There was one man, an officer too, we loved him, we sacrificed everything to him. That was long ago, 5 years ago, and he has forgotten us, he has married. Now he is a widower, he has written, he is coming here, and, do you know, we've loved him, none but him, all this time, and we've loved him all our life. He will come, and Grushenka will be happy again. For the last 5 years she's been wretched. But who can reproach her, who can boast of her favor? Only that bedridden old merchant, but he is more like her father, her friend, her protector. He found her then in despair, in agony, deserted by the man she loved. She was ready to drown herself then, but the old merchant saved her, saved her. You defend me very kindly, dear young lady. You are in a great hurry about everything, Grushenka drawled again. Defend you? Is it for me to defend you? Should I dare to defend you? Grushenka, angel, give me your hand. Look at that charming soft little hand, Alexey Fyodorovitch. Look at it. It has brought me happiness and has lifted me up, and I'm going to kiss it, outside and inside, here, here, here. And 3 times she kissed the certainly charming, though rather fat, hand of Grushenka in a sort of rapture. She held out her hand with a charming musical, nervous little laugh, watched the sweet young lady, and obviously liked having her hand kissed. Perhaps there's rather too much rapture, thought Alyosha. He blushed. He felt a peculiar uneasiness at heart the whole time. You won't make me blush, dear young lady, kissing my hand like this before Alexey Fyodorovitch. Do you think I meant to make you blush? Said Katerina Ivanovna, somewhat surprised. Ah, my dear, how little you understand me. Yes, and you too perhaps quite misunderstand me, dear young lady. Maybe I'm not so good as I seem to you. I've a bad heart, I will have my own way. I fascinated poor Dmitri Fyodorovitch that day simply for fun. But now you'll save him. You've given me your word. You'll explain it all to him. You'll break to him that you have long loved another man, who is now offering you his hand. Oh, no. I didn't give you my word to do that. It was you kept talking about that. I didn't give you my word. Then I didn't quite understand you, said Katerina Ivanovna slowly, turning a little pale. You promised. Oh, no, angel lady, I've promised nothing, Grushenka interrupted softly and evenly, still with the same gay and simple expression. You see at once, dear young lady, what a willful wretch I am compared with you. If I want to do a thing I do it. I may have made you some promise just now. But now again I am thinking, I may take to Mitya again. I liked him very much once, liked him for almost a whole hour. Now maybe I shall go and tell him to stay with me from this day forward. You see, I'm so changeable. Just now you said, something quite different, Katerina Ivanovna whispered faintly. Ah, just now? But, you know, I'm such a soft-hearted, silly creature. Only think what he's gone through on my account. What if when I go home I feel sorry for him? What then? I never expected. Ah, young lady, how good and generous you are compared with me. Now perhaps you won't care for a silly creature like me, now you know my character. Give me your sweet little hand, angelic lady, she said tenderly, and with a sort of reverence took Katerina Ivanovna's hand. Here, dear young lady, I'll take your hand and kiss it as you did mine. You kissed mine 3 times, but I ought to kiss yours 300 times to be even with you. Well, but let that pass. And then it shall be as God wills. Perhaps I shall be your slave entirely and want to do your bidding like a slave. Let it be as God wills, without any agreements and promises. What a sweet hand, what a sweet hand you have. You sweet young lady, you incredible beauty. She slowly raised the hands to her lips, with the strange object indeed of being even with her in kisses. Katerina Ivanovna did not take her hand away. She listened with timid hope to the last words, though Grushenka's promise to do her bidding like a slave was very strangely expressed. She looked intently into her eyes, she still saw in those eyes the same simple-hearted, confiding expression, the same bright gaiety. She's perhaps too naive, thought Katerina Ivanovna, with a gleam of hope. Grushenka meanwhile seemed enthusiastic over the sweet hand. She raised it deliberately to her lips. But she held it for 2 or 3 minutes near her lips, as though reconsidering something. Do you know, angel lady, she suddenly drawled in an even more soft and sugary voice, do you know, after all, I think I won't kiss your hand? And she laughed a little merry laugh. As you please. What's the matter with you? Said Katerina Ivanovna, starting suddenly. So that you may be left to remember that you kissed my hand, but I didn't kiss yours. There was a sudden gleam in her eyes. She looked with awful intentness at Katerina Ivanovna. Insolent creature, cried Katerina Ivanovna, as though suddenly grasping something. She flushed all over and leapt up from her seat. Grushenka too got up, but without haste. So I shall tell Mitya how you kissed my hand, but I didn't kiss yours at all. And how he will laugh. Vile slut. Go away. Ah, for shame, young lady. Ah, for shame. That's unbecoming for you, dear young lady, a word like that. Go away. You're a creature for sale. Screamed Katerina Ivanovna. Every feature was working in her utterly distorted face. For sale indeed. You used to visit gentlemen in the dusk for money once, you brought your beauty for sale. You see, I know. Katerina Ivanovna shrieked, and would have rushed at her, but Alyosha held her with all his strength. Not a step, not a word. Don't speak, don't answer her. She'll go away, she'll go at once. At that instant Katerina Ivanovna's 2 aunts ran in at her cry, and with them a maid-servant. All hurried to her. I will go away, said Grushenka, taking up her mantle from the sofa. Alyosha, darling, see me home. Go away, make haste, cried Alyosha, clasping his hands imploringly. Dear little Alyosha, see me home. I've got a pretty little story to tell you on the way. I got up this scene for your benefit, Alyosha. See me home, dear, you'll be glad of it afterwards. Alyosha turned away, wringing his hands. Grushenka ran out of the house, laughing musically. Katerina Ivanovna went into a fit of hysterics. She sobbed, and was shaken with convulsions. Everyone fussed round her. I warned you, said the elder of her aunts. I tried to prevent your doing this. You're too impulsive. How could you do such a thing? You don't know these creatures, and they say she's worse than any of them. You are too self-willed. She's a tigress, yelled Katerina Ivanovna. Why did you hold me, Alexei Fyodorovitch? I'd have beaten her. She could not control herself before Alyosha, perhaps she did not care to, indeed. She ought to be flogged in public on a scaffold. Alyosha withdrew towards the door. But, my God, cried Katerina Ivanovna, clasping her hands. He could be so dishonorable, so inhuman. Why, he told that creature what happened on that fatal, accursed day. You brought your beauty for sale, dear young lady. She knows it. Your brother's a scoundrel, Alexei Fyodorovitch. Alyosha wanted to say something, but he couldn't find a word. His heart ached. Go away, Alexei Fyodorovitch. It's shameful, it's awful for me. Tomorrow, I beg you on my knees, come tomorrow. Don't condemn me. Forgive me. I don't know what I shall do with myself now. Alyosha walked out into the street reeling. He could have wept as she did. Suddenly he was overtaken by the maid. The young lady forgot to give you this letter from Madame Holikov. It's been left with us since dinner time. Alyosha took the little pink envelope mechanically and put it, almost unconsciously, into his pocket. End of the chapter. Chapter 11. Another reputation ruined. It was not much more than 3/4 of a mile from the town to the monastery. Alyosha walked quickly along the road, at that hour deserted. It was almost night, and too dark to see anything clearly at 30 paces ahead. There were crossroads halfway. A figure came into sight under a solitary willow at the crossroads. As soon as Alyosha reached the crossroads, the figure moved out and rushed at him, shouting savagely, "Your money or your life." "So it's you, Mitya," cried Alyosha, in surprise, violently startled however. "Ha ha ha! You didn't expect me? I wondered where to wait for you. By her house? There are 3 ways from it, and I might have missed you. At last I thought of waiting here, for you had to pass here. There's no other way to the monastery. Come, tell me the truth. Crush me like a beetle. But what's the matter?" "Nothing, brother, it's the fright you gave me. Oh, Dmitri. Father's blood just now." Alyosha began to cry. He had been on the verge of tears for a long time, and now something seemed to snap in his soul. You almost killed him, cursed him, and now, here, you're making jokes, your money or your life. Well, what of that? It's not seemly, is that it? Not suitable in my position? No, I only... Stay. Look at the night. You see what a dark night, what clouds, what a wind has risen. I hid here under the willow waiting for you. And as God's above, I suddenly thought, why go on in misery any longer, what is there to wait for? Here I have a willow, a handkerchief, a shirt. I can twist them into a rope in a minute, and braces besides, and why go on burdening the earth, dishonoring it with my vile presence? And then I heard you coming, heavens, it was as though something flew down to me suddenly. So there is a man, then, whom I love. Here he is, that man, my dear little brother, whom I love more than anyone in the world, the only one I love in the world. And I loved you so much at that moment that I thought, I'll fall on his neck at once. Then a stupid idea struck me, to have a joke with you and scare you. I shouted, like a fool, your money. Forgive my foolery, it was only nonsense, and there's nothing unseemly in my soul. Damn it all, tell me what's happened. What did she say? Strike me, crush me, don't spare me. Was she furious? No, not that. There was nothing like that, Mitya. There, I found them both there. Both? Whom? Grushenka at Katerina Ivanovna's. Dmitri was struck dumb. Impossible, he cried. You're raving. Grushenka with her? Alyosha described all that had happened from the moment he went into Katerina Ivanovna's. He was 10 minutes telling his story. He can't be said to have told it fluently and consecutively, but he seemed to make it clear, not omitting any word or action of significance, and vividly describing, often in one word, his own sensations. Dmitri listened in silence, gazing at him with a terrible fixed stare. But it was clear to Alyosha that he understood it all, and had grasped every point. But as the story went on, his face became not merely gloomy, but menacing. He scowled, he clenched his teeth, and his fixed stare became still more rigid, more concentrated, more terrible, when suddenly, with incredible rapidity, his wrathful, savage face changed, his tightly compressed lips parted, and Dmitri Fyodorovich broke into uncontrolled, spontaneous laughter. He literally shook with laughter. For a long time he could not speak. So she wouldn't kiss her hand. So she didn't kiss it, so she ran away. He kept exclaiming with hysterical delight, insolent delight it might have been called, if it had not been so spontaneous. So the other one called her tigress. And a tigress she is. So she ought to be flogged on a scaffold? Yes, yes, so she ought. That's just what I think, she ought to have been long ago. It's like this, brother, let her be punished, but I must get better first. I understand the queen of impudence. That's her all over. You saw her all over in that hand-kissing, the she-devil. She's magnificent in her own line. So she ran home? I'll go, I'll run to her. Alyosha, don't blame me, I agree that hanging is too good for her. But Katerina Ivanovna, exclaimed Alyosha sorrowfully. I see her, too. I see right through her, as I've never done before. It's a regular discovery of the 4 continents of the world, that is, of the 5. What a thing to do. That's just like Katya, who was not afraid to face a coarse, unmannerly officer and risk a deadly insult on a generous impulse to save her father. But the pride, the recklessness, the defiance of fate, the unbounded defiance. You say that aunt tried to stop her? That aunt, you know, is overbearing, herself. She's the sister of the general's widow in Moscow, and even more stuck-up than she. But her husband was caught stealing government money. He lost everything, his estate and all, and the proud wife had to lower her colors, and hasn't raised them since. So she tried to prevent Katya, but she wouldn't listen to her. She thinks she can overcome everything. That everything will give way to her. She thought she could bewitch Grushenka if she liked, and she believed it herself. She plays a part to herself, and whose fault is it? Do you think she kissed Grushenka's hand first, on purpose, with a motive? No, she really was fascinated by Grushenka. That's to say, not by Grushenka, but by her own dream, her own delusion, because it was her dream, her delusion. Alyosha, darling, how did you escape from them, those women? Did you pick up your cassock and run? Ha ha ha. Brother, you don't seem to have noticed how you've insulted Katerina Ivanovna by telling Grushenka about that day. And she flung it in her face just now that she had gone to gentlemen in secret to sell her beauty. Brother, what could be worse than that insult? What worried Alyosha more than anything was that, incredible as it seemed, his brother appeared pleased at Katerina Ivanovna's humiliation. Bah! Dmitri frowned fiercely, and struck his forehead with his hand. He only now realized it, though Alyosha had just told him of the insult, and Katerina Ivanovna's cry, "Your brother is a scoundrel." Yes, perhaps, I really did tell Grushenka about that fatal day, as Katya calls it. Yes, I did tell her, I remember. It was that time at Mokray. I was drunk, the gypsies were singing. But I was sobbing. I was sobbing then. Kneeling and praying to Katya's image, and Grushenka understood it. She understood it all then. I remember, she cried herself. Damn it all. But it's bound to be so now. Then she cried, but now the dagger in the heart. That's how women are. He looked down and sank into thought. Yes, I am a scoundrel, a thorough scoundrel, he said suddenly, in a gloomy voice. It doesn't matter whether I cried or not, I'm a scoundrel. Tell her I accept the name, if that's any comfort. Come, that's enough. Goodbye. It's no use talking. It's not amusing. You go your way and I mine. And I don't want to see you again except as a last resource. Goodbye, Alexei. He warmly pressed Alyosha's hand, and still looking down, without raising his head, as though tearing himself away, turned rapidly towards the town. Alyosha looked after him, unable to believe he would go away so abruptly. Stay, Alexei, one more confession to you alone, cried Dmitri, suddenly turning back. Look at me. Look at me well. You see here, there's terrible disgrace in store for me. As he said here, Dmitri struck his chest with his fist with a strange air, as though the dishonor lay precisely on his chest, in some spot, in a pocket, perhaps, or hanging round his neck. You know me now, a scoundrel, an avowed scoundrel, but let me tell you that I've never done anything before and never shall again, anything that can compare in baseness with the dishonor which I bear now at this very minute on my breast, here, which will come to pass, though I'm perfectly free to stop it. I can stop it or carry it through, note that. Well, let me tell you, I shall carry it through. I shan't stop it. I told you everything just now, but I didn't tell you this, because even I had not brass enough for it. I can still pull up, if I do, I can give back the full half of my lost honor tomorrow. But I shan't pull up. I shall carry out my base plan, and you can bear witness that I told you so beforehand. Darkness and destruction. No need to explain. You'll find out in due time. The filthy back-alley and the she-devil. Goodbye. Don't pray for me, I'm not worth it. And there's no need at all. I don't need it. Away. And he suddenly retreated, this time finally. Alyosha went towards the monastery. What? I shall never see him again. What is he saying? He wondered wildly. Why, I shall certainly see him tomorrow. I shall look him up. I shall make a point of it. What does he mean? He went round the monastery, and crossed the pine wood to the hermitage. The door was opened to him, though no one was admitted at that hour. There was a tremor in his heart as he went into Father Zosima's cell. Why had he gone forth? Why had he sent him into the world? Here was peace. Here was holiness. But there was confusion, there was darkness in which one lost one's way and went astray at once. In the cell he found the novice Porphyry and Father Paisi, who came every hour to inquire after Father Zosima. Alyosha learnt with alarm that he was getting worse and worse. Even his usual discourse with the brothers could not take place that day. As a rule every evening after service the monks flocked into Father Zosima's cell, and all confessed aloud their sins of the day, their sinful thoughts and temptations, even their disputes, if there had been any. Some confessed kneeling. The elder absolved, reconciled, exhorted, imposed penance, blessed, and dismissed them. It was against this general confession that the opponents of elders protested, maintaining that it was a profanation of the sacrament of confession, almost a sacrilege, though this was quite a different thing. They even represented to the diocesan authorities that such confessions attained no good object, but actually to a large extent led to sin and temptation. Many of the brothers disliked going to the elder, and went against their own will because everyone went, and for fear they should be accused of pride and rebellious ideas. People said that some of the monks agreed beforehand, saying, "I'll confess I lost my temper with you this morning, and you confirm it, simply in order to have something to say." Alyosha knew that this actually happened sometimes. He knew, too, that there were among the monks some who deeply resented the fact that letters from relations were habitually taken to the elder, to be opened and read by him before those to whom they were addressed. It was assumed, of course, that all this was done freely, and in good faith, by way of voluntary submission and salutary guidance. But, in fact, there was sometimes no little insincerity, and much that was false and strained in this practice. Yet the older and more experienced of the monks adhered to their opinion, arguing that for those who have come within these walls sincerely seeking salvation, such obedience and sacrifice will certainly be salutary and of great benefit. Those, on the other hand, who find it irksome, and repine, are no true monks, and have made a mistake in entering the monastery. Their proper place is in the world. Even in the temple one cannot be safe from sin and the devil. So it was no good taking it too much into account. He is weaker, a drowsiness has come over him, Father Paisi whispered to Alyosha, as he blessed him. It's difficult to rouse him. And he must not be roused. He waked up for 5 minutes, sent his blessing to the brothers, and begged their prayers for him at night. He intends to take the sacrament again in the morning. He remembered you, Alexei. He asked whether you had gone away, and was told that you were in the town. I blessed him for that work, he said. His place is there, not here, for a while. Those were his words about you. He remembered you lovingly. With anxiety, do you understand how he honored you? But how is it that he has decided that you shall spend some time in the world? He must have foreseen something in your destiny. Understand, Alexei, that if you return to the world, it must be to do the duty laid upon you by your elder, and not for frivolous vanity and worldly pleasures. Father Paisi went out. Alyosha had no doubt that Father Zosima was dying, though he might live another day or two. Alyosha firmly and ardently resolved that in spite of his promises to his father, the Holokovs, and Katerina Ivanovna, he would not leave the monastery next day, but would remain with his elder to the end. His heart glowed with love, and he reproached himself bitterly for having been able for one instant to forget him whom he had left in the monastery on his deathbed, and whom he honored above everyone in the world. He went into Father Zosima's bedroom, knelt down, and bowed to the ground before the elder, who slept quietly without stirring, with regular, hardly audible breathing and a peaceful face. Alyosha returned to the other room, where Father Zosima had received his guests in the morning. Taking off his boots, he lay down on the hard, narrow, leathern sofa, which he had long used as a bed, bringing nothing but a pillow. The mattress, about which his father had shouted to him that morning, he had long forgotten to lie on. He took off his cassock, which he used as a covering. But before going to bed, he fell on his knees and prayed a long time. In his fervent prayer he did not beseech God to lighten his darkness but only thirsted for the joyous emotion, which always visited his soul after the praise and adoration, of which his evening prayer usually consisted. That joy always brought him light untroubled sleep. As he was praying, he suddenly felt in his pocket the little pink note the servant had handed him as he left Katerina Ivanovna's. He was disturbed, but finished his prayer. Then, after some hesitation, he opened the envelope. In it was a letter to him, signed by Lise, the young daughter of Madame Holikov, who had laughed at him before the elder in the morning. Alexei Fyodorovitch, she wrote, I am writing to you without anyone's knowledge, even Mamma's. And I know how wrong it is. But I cannot live without telling you the feeling that has sprung up in my heart, and this no one but us two must know for a time. But how am I to say what I want so much to tell you? Paper, they say, does not blush, but I assure you it's not true and that it's blushing just as I am now, all over. Dear Alyosha, I love you, I've loved you from my childhood, since our Moscow days, when you were very different from what you are now. And I shall love you all my life. My heart has chosen you, to unite our lives and pass them together till our old age. Of course, on condition that you will leave the monastery. As for our age we will wait for the time fixed by the law. By that time I shall certainly be quite strong, I shall be walking and dancing. There can be no doubt of that. You see how I've thought of everything. There's only one thing I can't imagine, what you'll think of me when you read this. I'm always laughing and being naughty. I made you angry this morning, but I assure you before I took up my pen, I prayed before the image of the Mother of God, and now I'm praying, and almost crying. My secret is in your hands. When you come tomorrow, I don't know how I shall look at you. Ah, Alexei Fyodorovich, what if I can't restrain myself like a silly and laugh when I look at you as I did today? You'll think I'm a nasty girl making fun of you, and you won't believe my letter. And so I beg you, dear one, if you've any pity for me, when you come tomorrow, don't look me straight in the face, for if I meet your eyes, it will be sure to make me laugh, especially as you'll be in that long gown. I feel cold all over when I think of it, so when you come, don't look at me at all for a time, look at Mama or at the window. Here I've written you a love letter. Oh, dear, what have I done? Alyosha, don't despise me, and if I've done something very horrid and wounded you, forgive me. Now the secret of my reputation, ruined perhaps forever, is in your hands. I shall certainly cry today. Goodbye till our meeting, our awful meeting. Lise. P.S. Alyosha. You must come. Lise. Alyosha read the note in amazement, read it through twice, thought a little, and suddenly laughed a soft, sweet laugh. He started. That laugh seemed to him sinful. But a minute later he laughed again just as softly and happily. He slowly replaced the note in the envelope, crossed himself and lay down. The agitation in his heart passed at once. God, have mercy upon all of them, have all these unhappy and turbulent souls in thy keeping, and set them in the right path. All ways are thine. Save them according to thy wisdom. Thou art love. Thou wilt send joy to all, Alyosha murmured, crossing himself, and falling into peaceful sleep. End of the chapter and the book 3. Thank you. Thank you.